Okay, hello. Welcome to this live stream, Rig Rundown, episode 9, I believe. Rig Rundown is a series of live streams I started a long time ago, just doing rig rundowns, looking at what people are performing with, but not just module by module, their intentions as well. And I have Brett, Second Breakfast. How's it going?
Hey Ben, going well.
Yeah,
How are you?
good. So we've only just met somewhat recently. I'd found your content prior, but then as activities grown around my Discord kind of community based around my Patreon page, been much more chat and we've got to know each other. So for me, I imagine like some of the audience, it's a really nice way to get to know a bit of your background as well. But I will say hello to the live chat. We can see you, or at least I can see you. You can be putting questions to us. I'll be pulling questions out into my notes if they're not relevant. We'll keep breaking off and asking questions as we go. But you recently put out a track, Imaginary Friends, which is, I think, what's brought us here and going to be the basis for that monster of a patch that's behind you and the majority of the stream. So I'd like to play a little bit of that, around 60 seconds, for people to check out before we come back and get started. Okay, so I'm muted, so that'll be, 50 seconds or so, and then that'll come back. Quick check. It's a really nice way for me to break off and check the chat as well. Just to make sure no one's going, Ben, you're quiet, you're whatever. Oh, that's cool. Gerald's picked up on the fact that I put some little DivKid characters in the background. There's an octopus, the div squid, rather than an octopus, and a wildebeest. There's all sorts of kind of daft little DivKid characters. Okay, it seems people could hear me but not the music. Oh, that's frustrating. You just you just heard me kind of talking to Brett saying, oh yeah, we're all right, we've got 60 seconds and blah 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 blah. Good job I don't say bad things when I think I can't be heard. That's a shame. I'll figure that out. We've a couple of video clips that I can maybe play in later. Thanks for everyone in the chat. As the stream goes along, anything at all like that, just everybody shout at me in the live chat. It's really handy just to really grab my attention. If there's an audio issue or something's quite not right, I'll figure the video thing out as we get going. But to dive in, I'd like to kind of go right back, as most interviews would, into a little bit of your musical journey, Brett. As I say, I don't know, if you used to play guitar years ago, or you're in a band, or if any of that in your musical history. Where did kind of music start for you?
Yeah, it originally started like I think a lot of people. I took some piano lessons for a few years as a kid. That would really be the original basis. So, but then I quit probably around like 10 and didn't play anything really until I started getting into making electronic music. So yeah, no history in bands personally, but professionally, I've been around music a lot. In my 20s, I worked in the music industry, but on the visual side of things. I traveled all over the country with a band, shooting and filming them, made a couple music videos. I did editing music documentaries for a while. So it's music's always had a special place in my life. And then it wasn't until about 2014 when I was, at the time, I part of my professional background is I worked for Apple in their film and advertising department for 8 years. And just it's a very demanding environment to be working in, and just working on the visual side of things all the time. I started to really look for some other hobby outside of work that was like going to take me, I wanted to use other creative outlets and other senses really. And music was the perfect fit for that. So that's kind of when I started exploring synthesizers in general. I took a class, I was living in, excuse me, San Francisco at the time. I took a class on like Synthesis 101 at Robot Speak. I think we were using like, you had a bunch of MS-10s or MS-20s.
Oh, that's nice.
And that was really I think it's the perfect, it's a perfect sense for kind of learning the basics of a subtractive patch. And after I did that, I was hooked. And I've kind of parallel pathed, having outboard hardware and modular. You won't be able to see it, but on the other side of my studio, I've got a pretty decent vintage synth collection. Nice. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of around that same time, like 2014, 2015, I started going down the rabbit hole of modular. And that was a very, very deep rabbit hole. I'm still digging to this day.
It's cool to know you kind of went off on tour. I mean, it doesn't matter if someone hasn't had that background, of course, but you did that, but with maybe camera kit as opposed to lugging the guitar around or flight cases for drums and stuff like that. That's really cool. And I'd like to get into that because the quality of the video, and I'll put the links and all the links in the description. And for those watching live, I'll be dumping links in the live chat as we go. I just put a link into the modular grid for the case that's probably going to change slightly, which we'll discuss as well, but that's based around the track Imaginary Friends. So when did Second Breakfast kind of come into it? Was that right around the time of getting into modular, wanting a project, wanting to form, not form you as an artist, because that's always an ongoing kind of creative bubble that we're all kind of in, but was it a deliberate kind of forming of a project? When did that come into play?
No. So Second Breakfast as a project, I think really has been about within the last year. And that really, it took me so long to get to that point because really, I mean, 2014 through the to 2019, I really just spent as much as I was learning specifically synthesis, I was really also in pursuit of just learning music theory and learning the language of music. It really, I've always, from the time I knew I wanted to work in filmmaking in some capacity from the time I was saw Jurassic Park, and I was 7 or 8 years old. I have it written down in a notepad of that time. I'm like, I'm gonna do filmmaking. So I always thought of myself as a visual person. I made this arbitrary distinction in my mind that some people are more visually minded and some people are more auditorily minded. And I think there's probably some truth to that, but right around 2014, it was like, I just couldn't understand. I would sit down, whether that was, I was working in Ableton as well, trying to just make stuff with plugins. But I was so frustrated and taken aback of why can't I make music? What am I, is there something fundamentally lacking from my makeup that I just I don't have the gene or whatever? And I decided to challenge that thought, that I'm a visual person, not a music person. And really that was the main motivator, and that's still my main motivator now. That's why I do this, is just to prove to myself that I can. So I really spent 4 or 5 years just learning, studying theory, studying what different parts of a scale and different chords in a scale, how to speak with that language, and just still continuing to try to write music, but just not being able to. I just didn't have enough grasp of it, enough skill. But I stuck with it for 4 or 5 years, and And so within the last year, it all started to finally click. And I suddenly found myself like being able to not only make songs, but to make songs that I actually like felt like I had some control over. I knew how I got there. It wasn't luck. And I knew how to, like, if I wanted to make this a certain section have a certain emotion or take a turn from, a main theme I was working with, like, I finally felt a sense of control to be able to do that. And that's when I was like, okay, time to, grab my favorite Tolkien reference and become second breakfast.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, this big pursuit of music theory that kind of help put things together. And it's really nice to hear that works out in a way that you feel that can guide a musical twist or turn, as opposed to somehow being restrictive. There definitely seems to be a backlash against music theory at times online. And I think that's very surface level. I'm guilty of that as well, in that learning guitar, I'd miss melodic and harmonic structure being a drummer. I also couldn't play drums late at night, and all my friends could still play a guitar really quietly or just an acoustic in a bedroom as a kid. And I was like, I can't, like hitting pillows isn't the same. I'm going to just have to get a guitar. So I ended up getting a guitar.
It's hard to get your 10,000 hours in.
So
like that.
I ended up,
And
my parents were great in terms of noise and band practice and so much that they put up with. They were great. But 8:00 at night, nothing too late. You can't be slamming drums on a residential suburban street. So got into guitar, and I remember learning a scale and then feeling it has to be in that. And I remember even saying to the guitarist in the band, he was like, if we've moved this harmony up in the chorus between the two guitar players, it's got this really cool edge. And I was like, you can't do that because it's not the correct, it should be a minor third on the six interval in a scale.
Yeah.
Or it's something to that effect. And it was kind of like, whatever. And it worked. It would have worked either way, but it did definitely change my ear and kind of just guide me down this structured path. And I think that's where people get to when they're very judgmental of theory. As opposed to it just being this box of tricks that you become comfortable with them. And then they are there. They're the twists, they're the turns, you know what you can do. Very simple things like a harmonic minor has a raised seventh compared to a natural minor, and all of a sudden that sounds very Eastern. And it's just, but what that does as you get deeper into theory, and this isn't a theory stream, I'll stop in a minute. that makes a 5-1 cadence come from a major chord 5 because you've raised the seventh in a harmonic minor. So it's a case of, all right, I can do this harmonic minor thing, but actually I'm just trying to get almost more resolved kind of Western cadences out of a minor scale rather than the Eastern flavor of kind of playing off that raised seventh note. So it just becomes this kind of super helpful thing for me. It becomes this framework of, just as much as knowing these systems and shapes and boxes I can move around a guitar neck, it's kind of like boxes around, I don't know, creative juices or something like that. Maybe that's overly romanticized, but I'm glad to hear it went well and that was a pursuit that was good, and it has been for me. So how did that...
Yeah, and I'll add to that quickly, Ben, is that it's, I think the saying, you have to know the rules to break them, is what kind of frames why I thought it was important to learn theory. And, so when things first started to click, I mean, I was just like, playing very exclusively in like C major and just like really getting down like, like a 1-4-5 and like, I totally get why that works and how I'm creating this tension and resolve. And then like kind of once getting that foundation of like, this is how to stay like on a straight and narrow path. Then you start to learn of like, how do I play with these expectations to a listener? And like, what can I do to introduce surprise, and then from that point, you start to step out into chord substitutions. And then I feel like, that's still in the realm of theory, but like, I feel like it's also like you're starting to break the rules, and you're starting to grasp intuitively and just by, using your ear, how far off of the path that music theory provides, or like basically like diatonic scales, how far can you, how in control of what you're doing are you, that you know how far you can lead a listener off but not get lost? And to me, that's a really exciting art form in itself. And you know, one of the main things I've grown to love about creating stuff with, you know, creating music.
There's that great video with Jacob Collier, and I think he's playing Amazing Grace, and it's something like teaching music theory to like kids, to Herbie Hancock at the end. And you know, really young kids, just plays Amazing Grace, talking about how music makes them feel. Does the resolve of the cadence feel happy? And it kind of goes up, I think it's like a 10-year-old and a teenager, and then someone studying music as a kind of 18-year-old. So they're a bit more clued in. It gets a little bit more interesting. And I think it's the one with maybe like a 10 or 12-year-old girl. He really goes off path with his harmony choices. And he's like, how does this feel? It's strange, like we're in some weird, mysterious environment. But a few chord moves back down the keyboard and it's resolved and it's all lovely again. And you watch that and you're just like, this is why this stuff's so cool. And of course, by the time he's got Herbie Hancock next to him, it's a whole other level entirely. But the way it goes through, I'll have to find a link for people as we move on to the next point. I'll find that link and put it in the live chat. Maybe make a note to put it in the description later. So how did this then fall into modular, the theory side? I saw a comment in the live chat earlier, like Symphonian unite. Like there's been a lot of chat about Mateus's Symphonian with ACL, which we'll come to specific modules. But what was it like trying to get these ideas of theory, harmony, melodic, you know, working with intervals in a modular system? Was it just frustrating to start with, or how was that?
Totally. Yeah, I think I didn't notice it much in my first couple years because my understanding of theory and wasn't wasn't strong enough either. So, which was probably fine, you know, because what I basically started on, I made my very first toe dip into modular. I made some really terrible choices and like ended up with, you know, this small like wooden 84 HP Doepfer case. Actually, it's still right there. And then like 3 modules and I didn't know the difference between like a trigger and a gate, and like I basically couldn't do anything. So I was like, oh crap, what did I do? And I sold those modules, and then right around the same time, Make Noise was transitioning to having their shared system be all black and gold. And they had, you know, I don't know how many, but they had these leftover kind of mishmashy shared systems that they were offering at like a huge discount, you know, maybe like $1,000 less than if you wanted to get their black and gold one. And I just decided like, I think I should do that. You know, I had enough understanding of the modular world to know that like one way of looking at it is that, you know, even that's kind of like a complete system and a little sacrilegious if you're really going for like building your own system. But I was very impressed with the fact that this is a system built up of separate modules, yet when you buy it together, Make Noise has this brilliant, really dense technical manual as well as creative manual that really is not only going to, like, you know, usually when you get a module, you get a manual that's about that one module, and it's, you know, they have no idea what kind of a system you're putting it in. So it'd be like, you know, it'd just be how could they ever like guess what else you might have? But anyways, with the Make Noise shared system, they knew what you were going to have. And so they could teach you all of these different patching ideas that used multiple modules. And, you know, so that's really how I learned the language of modular. But so, you know, back to your question, while not knowing enough about how to do things like in terms of harmonics and intervals and stuff like that yet, I just was kind of doing the blips and bloops and you know, just making little patches that weren't songs, at least in the first couple of years. And then it was really like within the last 2 years where my music theory ability was catching up to, you know, like to a point where I wanted to start to implement it into modular. And that's when I got super frustrated. And I tried like, and I'll call this, we're still in the pre-Symphonian era. So I tried like every workaround under the sun to get it. I was like, okay, I had like the intro harmonic, and then I was like, I had like multiple, I had like a IntelliGel scales and multiple other quantizers, and then I was like trying to figure out how could I send those all signals to like all switch to harmonically at the same time. And I think that there's ways to do it, to patch together essentially your own Symphonian, but I never got there. And so I was, I did hit a point where I was like, man, is this even possible? Did I go down a long road? And of course my system still wasn't this big. It was probably like half the size, but still big enough to, if I had a Symphonian, do what I wanted to do harmonically. And then it was like the answer to what I was looking for and what I was aspiring to do with my system. The Symphonian was introduced, and I got that, and it was like instantly, like it was like I had arrived, and I was now able to do. I went from like, that not being able to get a whole song that I felt like was interesting finished to just being like, oh, I got the key to the kingdom now, and everything kind of changed from there. And that's kind of like the birth of Second Breakfast, if you will.
In the chat, it was just mentioned, it'd be really nice if Mateus was here for this. I had the pleasure of meeting Mateus behind the Symphonian when it was with Instruo at Modular Meets Leeds, an event I do mid-August each year. That will be online this year, so hopefully everyone here can join it and maybe take part live in that in the middle of August. Won't be a real event, real online, however you want to frame it. It's not going to be a physical event, how it usually is, pandemic pending, of course. But yeah, Mateus was great. A lot of really interesting ideas. And I'd definitely like to come into the Symphonian. I'm going to try and play that video again, just to set the framework of Imaginary Friends, this piece that this current incarnation of your setup is based on. Worst case, the stream is about 20 seconds behind. If it's me talking again, and Gerald, I won't start having a go at your standing desk, as I joked earlier, like I'm talking about you behind your back. Let me know, and I'll just move back if you can't hear it. But let's give it a try. It worked that time, so I'm glad we could share a little bit of that. And the full video, I will go link that right now. People should absolutely go watch it. I won't feel offended if you stop this stream to go and watch it in full and come back, but definitely go watch it afterwards, if not. Free Acid, Wishbone Brewery says, some mad stuff on screen. Yeah, that's where these little characters are from. I was joking that Gerald had found the div squid and other bits in and amongst Brett's little characters. We'll come back to animation. It's definitely something that I'd like to touch on as well. But Symphonian as well, we'll maybe come back to as we go on. But you wanted to get this whole system playing full songs, and that's really the framework for this whole stream, and certainly I've been kind of pitching it out. I think that's the really unique angle that, as always with Modular, there's such a wide breadth of styles, approaches, kind of musical outcomes that people are interested in, regardless of any of that. And that's always how I try and make my demos. I don't want them to just be like, oh, Ben does techno demos, or he's always just doing ambient stuff. I hope there's a good breadth of things in there for people. And with this, regardless of the style, just going about a system that is full songs that aren't just jamming on a patch for 15 minutes. It's transitions, fills, sections, feels little key changes, little shifts that are a little bit outside the sequences at times. Where did that come in? Was that the goal of, I'm going to do that with this system, or did this just develop over time? Because I feel a lot of us will be at a point where we maybe want to do that, but it maybe wasn't the goal from the start, because it's easy to just dive into more, I don't know, indulging in sound, for example, or making styles of music that just jam and develop on a more, hesitant to say basic, because that's, you know, maybe seen as a negative connotation to it, but just simpler approaches as opposed to song-like approaches, which are technically that bit harder. So yeah, when did that come in to play? Was that I am going to make this instrument fit this music I want? Did it feel like it could do that, or that it wouldn't, or what was that journey like?
Yeah, it wasn't, I don't think, I mean, it definitely wasn't my goal from the start. Kind of like I said, you know, the original goal was just, I was drawn to synthesis and then modular. And it was purely just because I enjoyed playing with it so much, and I enjoyed the cables and the knobs and all that kind of stuff. And then, you know, kind of getting in that middle intermediate area and like experimenting with, okay, I can like get a patch going, and that's like a part of a song, and I'll record that, and then I'll patch something else, you know, like kind of just like turning one system into the different instrument that I need to fill out a song, and then edit that in a DAW. I started to go down that route. And then I think it was actually, I stumbled across Colin Bender's early live streams and his stuff. And I think I hadn't thought about it till now, but that was probably what planted the idea in my mind that you could have a system that is fully capable of making songs like that. You know, the system is self-contained, you compose in it, and then you can perform it. I think he was the inspiration, and seeing him planted that seed to start to head towards that goal.
Yeah, it's interesting that Colin's work will do kind of what I was getting at earlier, kind of jamming in a kind of dance sense around a certain style or theme sometimes, but then all the harmonic development comes into play with that really nicely as well. There's so much stuff from Colin. I can't really pinpoint when things happened because he's streaming such long streams sometimes, but there's been some really nice moments, like when Tysh from Noisier was with Colin, and him finding certain modules that speak to him. It's really interesting recently to see he was excited by Deckard's voice. The Black Corporation module, it's a really lovely sounding thing. And slightly made me feel better about not having a Deckard's dream, which I would like. But, you know, that's
wouldn't we
it's
all?
not going to happen anytime soon, realistically. But yeah, a couple of questions. Stu J. Hi, Stu. Stu's another member of the Discord community and Patreon community, as is Brett here.
Hi, Stu.
Also putting out some good content. Stu streams on a Sunday evening UK time. I'll have to double check when that is, but I'll be sure to link these things as we go along. But Stu asked, where did you turn to teach yourself music theory? Just winding back a little bit.
Anywhere I could find it. Tons of YouTube videos. I bought countless books, and I even had like apps. There's apps that help you like ear train and learn intervals, or I mean, anything that was going to get me that much closer to my goal, nothing was off limits. I've also I take lessons regularly. I'm also have been learning guitar the last 2 years, and a lot of those guitar lessons are actually like mostly theory lessons. We're using the guitar as, you know, that's just the instrument at hand because it's convenient, but really the conversations are always around you know, ideas that can apply to music in general or any instrument. So yeah, I mean, take it wherever you can get it. I feel like if you're driven and you want to know, that drive will connect you with the right information that you need. But it's like, I mean, you could probably do it all on YouTube. I would say YouTube is the most amazing educational resource in the history of in my
absolutely
opinion.
Bruno in the chat, hey Bruno, often in streams and comments, thank you for that. Mentions Rick Beato's book is a real Bible. Rick Beato's channel, some great content on there, but definitely recommend having been a college lecturer for music for some time and 10 years plus to that, teaching guitar and the framework around it, learning an instrument you can apply this to. And I've never been involved in a situation where it's maybe the modular and something like a Symphonian, and we're talking about, you know, if these buttons are lit, that forms a minor 7 chord, and what that is and how it feels and sounds and how to work with it. But learning guitar, I mean, for me, right through school, I'd be scribbling a fretboard down on the side of exam papers all the time, thinking about, you know, maybe a listening test. I'm like, does it feel like this move, like an octave, or is it like just short? Like, I'm just trying to kind of physically see it and hear it and tie all that together. For listening and oral training, everybody has different kind of references, but I find the people that I've worked with the best ears are just, their head is just full of references all the time. We were playing in a school production of Little Shop of Horrors, which, you know, nothing to write home about particularly, just standard school production for the summer. And he was counting a track off, and he's so on the tempos. I was like, David, how and why, like, how are you getting this? Like, every time, being the drummer, it's usually my job, but him MDing the band, he was counting things off, and I was like, you're so on it, way more than a lot of people I've worked with. And he was like, oh, it Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana. And you're like, what? Like, we're doing a Little Shop of Horrors production. He's like, that's the tempo. And things like, but then having intervals as well that are nice reference points, like Go West by the Pet Shop Boys. The Go West is a sixth interval. So it's like anytime I'd hear that, Pet Shop Boys would come to mind. And it might be that you're listening to some Beethoven and then Pet Shop Boys come blasting into the back of your mind, and it's just an odd thing, but we need these references, I think. But being able to apply it to an instrument, absolutely the way to do it. Adam Neely's come up. Adam Neely's content's great. Polyrhythms as polychords or polyharmony was a favourite of his recently. Well, a couple of years old now, but yeah. Slightly unrelated question, but as questions will mount up as we go, I'd like to chip away at a few. DB Powland asked, why do you prefer right-angled cables only? There's been a couple of points that it looks dense and tricky as a patch.
Oh yeah, great question. And before I answer it, though, I thought I wanted to shout out a couple specific learning educational resources that I found particularly helpful. One is his name is Jake Lizio. I think his YouTube channel is Signal Sounds Music or something Signal Music. But if you type in Jake Lizio, he makes fantastic videos on music theory, songwriting that are primarily based on guitar, but the way he presents them, they're meant to apply to any instrument at all. But super fantastic channel. And then also, I've been taking lessons with Light Bass through his Patreon and Discord. He offers a tier where you can, you know, I guess you could get as many as you want, but the tier is like I do one lesson a month with him. And that's also, he's a fantastic teacher as well. So if you're interested in taking lessons with him, check out his Patreon. But fantastic question about right angle. I do use 100% right angle. Let's say 99%. I have a couple of tip-top stackables just out of necessity. But and that's something that I switched to in the last couple months. I've always used about 50% right angles, and specifically tendrils. I love tendrils, and they are obviously right angles, so they stay low against your system. And then, but I think also as important is their wires are super thin. So while it might, maybe on video or whatever from the view from here, it might seem chaotic or like messy. It is nothing compared to when I get the system patched with a traditional cable. The reason why I switched over was because I actually became so frustrated with regular patch cables, because by the time I'd get 50, 75% through a patch, I had a really hard time just getting through the wall of cables and actually to touch my knobs or to see what's going on. And to me, tendrils just solves that, because they don't have the density compared to regular cables, and they can just kind of wiggle in between all your knobs without actually obscuring them. So I'm super, super happy switching to tendrils, and I don't foresee ever using anything else, because it solved a major, major problem that actually, like, it kind of, that leads into a little bit of conversation, which we'll have at some point, with like how I arrived at how I arrange all the modules for 100% for a song that's created and lives and performs 100% just in this case. A huge part of figuring that out was just purely getting around problems with cable density and avoiding spots where you would just have so much density that it became unusable. So yeah, excellent question. And check out tendrils cables if you haven't already, because in my opinion, they're the best cables in Eurorack.
Yeah, you're coming through a little bit blocky. I know you're wired in internet-wise. I don't know if there's anything you can do. If it gets really bad, people in the chat, let us know. I think what I'm seeing is the same as what you're seeing. It does look a little blocky. But I can hear Brett, which is the main thing. But do let us know. I'm watching the live chat. If anything is wrong with the stream, we'll try our best to fix it. Yeah, I'd agree with tendrils cables. Okay. They look like they're maybe less flexible than they are. I think the kind of relief on the angle will bend up and over things. It looks like, how am I going to physically fit all of those at the bottom of the module? And I haven't had an issue with them. And they've not broke when I've done that. Not that I've been particularly aggressive, but just been like, I am going to get all right angle cables on these like 9 jacks at the bottom of a little module. And they'll just kind of push up around each other. And it seems to work fine. Luigi's modular cables came up. Unfortunately, they're not available at the moment. Luigi stopped doing those for now. He did have 2 heights of right angle cables. You could have one like piggyback over the other, which is a really cool idea. It looks like you live in the 90s with the blocky thing. Yeah, sorry, production sir. As long as you can hear it, we'll keep going. If disastrous quality strikes us, then maybe we'll have to figure it out. But yeah. So with a modular, you mentioned having some access to vintage synths and other gear. Why 100% modular? For those that are like absolutely itching to dive into modules, that's going to be the next point to get into that. But I'm curious, because I think a lot of people would approach it, and maybe you did for a while first, of, well, I've got a really cool polysynth, or I've got a mono synth that I love, so I don't need my bass line maybe to be modular, or I've got a drum machine I really enjoy, so I'm not going to get drum modules, and I'm going to try and patch and clock everything. Is it just that that's potentially harder to wrangle physically as it kind of sprawls out around a room, or what was the turning point for, I want to do all this in a modular system?
Although I'll first say that I do make other music. I don't really, I haven't released much of it, but where I don't use modular at all, and then I use all the other stuff and guitar
Yeah.
and use the hardware stuff. That's why I still have those. But I mean, I don't think there's any like necessarily logical or objective answer to it. It just kind of became, once I had started to have enough modules to have an inkling that I could do it. It just became the goal, and also I don't much, in my few attempts to like clock sync the modular with other stuff, it just never really was satisfactory for me. And I just kind of find that like once I step into the modular world, I just enjoy being self-contained in that. I don't worry about it having to go out anywhere or anything else coming in. It also, actually probably the biggest reason is, despite what looks like a lack of limitation here, I'll switch over to this if hopefully it's not too blocky, but believe it or not, this is a limitation for me. Just this to be contained within the walls of these cases. Like I need that limitation, and I need that like, okay, it can only be this big. Yes, there's a lot, but still, I mean, when you're composing full songs, like I do feel the limitation of this case. I butt up against the edges of like, if I had a couple more of this particular utility or whatever, but that it is largely driven by I needed some sort of cutoff, or else I just spin out in choice browse.
Yeah, it's interesting. We had a similar thing with the Feeding the Monster streams with Chris Meyer from Learning Modular, where the ADAC monster, he was just kind of stood and did this and said, for me and my height and the desk it's on and my studio, that monster case feels like his instrument. And it was even a case of thinking of taking that ADAC monster out and performing live. And you may look at that and go, well, it's a meter wide, it's XYZ, it's so many rows, it's so big, it's so much money, it's all these different things, but it is still somewhat of a limitation. And the kind of songs that you're creating, like Imaginary Friends, it's not going to be done on a little travel briefcase. It's just not, no way. So regardless of restriction being, well, the 3-module challenge or a 10 cable challenge or whatever, there's still some element of restriction. And yeah, I can imagine, I know the feeling's the same for me with multiple cases stacked up as a little kind of wall at the side of the room. There is still that feeling of, if I just had another case, it would do this, or this patch could do with something else, and I'll pull a briefcase up onto the table or something like that. So I can see that there's still some element of restriction. Definitely.
I mean, I think the biggest one for me, that helps me the most from spinning out is the biggest cutoff is no software. Because when I used to dabble in software, and anytime I have done it just for other stuff, it's just the allure of like, oh, well, I could use infinite plugins. Of course, you'll hit a CPU usage, but like it's the mentality that just like you can continue to sound design something. You can just slap, you can continue to tweak it, knowing that there's really, you search the internet and there's thousands and thousands and thousands of plugins, and they're a lot easier to obtain than modules. And that just spins my brain out completely. So yeah, just, its limitation has been super important for any productivity for me.
I remember a conversation with Richard Devine saying that, in a computer, every millisecond of time can be sculpted in time, frequency, volume, transient shape. Everything is infinitely kind of tweakable, and it does put you in a different headspace. There's something, it's not playing to the strength of a computer at all, but it's such an elegant thing to just use it like a tape machine at times. Just, it's an 8-track recorder or up to 10, 16, whatever that is, it's just there to pipe audio in, and it's not in sync. And for me and my music with Modular, I tend to pull about 10 tracks in, but I'm thinking in terms of stems as opposed to individual things, if it's maybe a dense drum mix. And I'll pull a stereo mix in, and then the 8 most important parts I may feel I needed, or some of them summed if it's a denser patch. And I don't sync it at all. If I really think I might need to sync it, I'll send an audio percussion track that is just a rim shot or something like that, and then I'll just use a meter plugin to give me an exact tempo. I can get quite close by ear, but because it's just me literally turning a rate knob on something or setting a sequencer, it might be 131.34 beats per minute. It's never dead on because I'm just going by feel, as is tuning a lot of the time. The tuning is, for me, is the system is tuned to itself, and the intervals and the chords are correct as I want them to be. But if my quantizer says it's playing a C, it's often not, because I've just moved the fundamental pitch wherever I want it to be. I had someone ask recently about that their sequencer was saying C3, but it was playing a B, and it was really frustrating for them. I mean, if you've got perfect pitch, I imagine that would really great. People that perfect pitch is not something you can necessarily work towards. You can get closer to it, but perfect pitch is just knowing. It seems to be in people or not. And if people are interested, go Google perfect pitch. But it just doesn't bother me. So largely my melodic work on a modular system, my quantizer's based around modes of a C scale, because I just tune the oscillator to wherever it is. Because you can often only see an octave on a quantizer. I don't like the kind of wrapping around of, well, if I start on F or G, I don't have the octave to look up the rest of the scale, so I tend to just stay in C and think of intervals, and then I'll tune around it. I mean, I've been guilty of that when I've had to play piano maybe in a band for recording a cover for someone's college work and they don't have a keys player, so I'll just ham my way through it. I will put it in a key I can play in because I'm not a great piano player or keys player, so it's all right, let's get the chord progression down, and then I'll just use transpose on a digital keyboard and we'll get there.
Right.
I'm not trying to impress anyone with that. It's just a functional, like, I can play that chord progression but not in B flat minor or whatever key the song is that they're in.
Right.
So that's interesting. So is the computer very much like that for you? It's a polished mix on Imaginary Friends, and I thought a really bold choice that the snare drums panned so far right as well. It immediately caught my ear with that track. I was like, oh, the snare's not center, which is, kick and snare are usually right down the middle. So it was great that it just kind of caught my attention.
Yeah.
Are you mixing? Just like EQ, compression, that kind of thing in the computer? Or how are you recording the modular?
I record stereo out, and then I have the DB25 expander for one of I have two performance mixers, WMD performance mixers, and one of them, the one that I put all of my like melodic voices on, that has the expander. So when I record, I do record all the individual outs of that, and then the stereo master. But to be totally honest, like even on Imaginary Friends, I have the stems just in case I want to go back and fine tooth comb it at a point in the future if I release this on Bandcamp or something. But for the most part, I'm just happy with the stereo mix, and I try to have it like dialed in right here. And then the only thing I do on the software side is a mastering, so like just a gentle kind of EQ for the whole thing, and then just getting the levels right. That's so yeah, it's like my computer is a tape recorder, and then a device to like get the levels correct for putting on YouTube.
Just to repeat a comment I just replied, an interesting point that came up. Mark Booth said, if you want someone to remix your stems, you really need to tune your oscillator to a real key. He prefers to tune to what feels right, and that often ends up being a slightly flat E. That's interesting. There's quite a lot of Michael Jackson work in a slightly flat E, but not quite E flat. Not quite sure why that is, but you notice it if you're trying to learn and play Michael Jackson tunes. Like, I'm slightly out, and you put the guitar in E flat, and you're not right either. Where that came from, I don't know. But yeah, in terms of remix work, I did a lot of remix work. DivKid was a dance project and a lot of production work with my friend Andrew. That's how DivKid started, long before Modular. 10 years ago, maybe more than that. 12 years ago, maybe. I've been into Modular for 7 or so years. But we definitely had to remix some tracks that weren't in a key. You're maybe just given audio, you're not given MIDI. Maybe they've pulled it off hardware, so they don't have MIDI as a kind of modern remix pack anywhere from a label or something. You just kind of like, as you do, you kind of hit in the keys, just one finger in frustration, like trying to find where some sort of key center is. I've definitely had to go in and change it from being 440 in, say, a software plugin or a synth to something else. Just move the bass tuning of the whole DAW to just fit, or just shift audio. Just be a case of being kind of brute force of it, right? It's almost F. I'm going to make it F in Melodyne or something like that, which sounds a lot better than it used to, kind of reworking audio. We used to find that if it was Ableton Live, for anyone curious, we'd use the repitch and retime that was like moving tape speed or vinyl, so it didn't kind of mess with all the kind of grains of the sound, and then you'd have to cut it all up. Anyway, yeah, big pain. It depends on what you're doing, of course. I know Detachi, a really great album called System on Modular, and some really great videos from Joseph Frioli. Does a lot of TV and film sound design under the name Jaffbox. Sort of Warp Records, AFX-ish. Quite frantic rhythms, but always pinned down with like a 2/4 claps. It's got some really nice musicality to it. He will tune his modular that way as well. As an instrument, it's tuned, but it's not to a reference because it doesn't need to play to anything else. I don't know if they've remixes and if anyone spoke of frustrations with that. That's an interesting thing. At this point, I'd like to play a little bit more video through. I'm keen to hear it and share that as well. So let me play a little bit more video, and then we'll get into some specific modules. Okay, we'll play a little bit more, but again, I will put the link to the full track Imaginary Friends in the live chat again, and I'll keep dumping links, and they'll be in the description as well. Couple of questions before we dive into module specifics. There was a Symphonian question from Oliver Wagner. We'll come to that because that would be module specific stuff. Someone asked, do you have any DIY stuff in your system? They couldn't see any DIY based modules on your modular grid.
I do not, unless I bought something used that somebody else DIY'd and I've forgotten what they didn't tell me. But I had an interest in going down that path. But I like bought these really cheap like kits, you know, a little like heart circuit board that you solder lights on to try to learn. And I was able to do that, but I just ultimately decided that I already have very limited time. I have 2 kids, and one of them's 8 months old. I have such little time to make music already that I just made a call to not spend my precious time making my own modules. Although I think that also, you know, that sounds fun and rewarding, but I just had to make a choice.
Same for me. There's so much I'd like to do project-wise outside of work and demos and everything else that DIY gets pushed aside. The odd time I've done it, it's been nice. I'll repair, you know, cables. You know, I've been repairing cables for pedal boards and stuff like that for years, but I'm not great at it because I don't put the time in. So it always feels like it's quite a long thing if it's based on any kind of project. You know, if I've got something for a purpose, I find it frustrating personally because I just don't have the time to do it properly. When I have had an evening, just get a coffee or a nice drink and just solder, and it's just me in the house and I can just build something. but that's not happened for years, truth be told. And it's not going to do, you know, and that's fine. DIY community is great, and there's a lot of great DIY modules out there. I'm lucky that people that make them will send me them built to then do demos of. But it's an exercise unto itself, I think, an enjoyable one as well.
Yeah, if there was a module that I like had to have, and it only existed in a DIY, well, I guess first I'd try to find somebody else who could make it for me, but like I would do it, you know, like I would get that motivation to spend the time on it, and I would do it. But I haven't hit that yet.
Exactly. You hit the point for me. I was just thinking as you were saying, if I had to do it, I was like, no, you wouldn't, because you'd find someone to throw money at. There's a few people. If anyone's wanting anything DIY and they're struggling to find it, start asking friends, whether that's me in the comments here or find Brett somewhere and even ask. But there's a few people around the world that do really good work. Pay them for their time, buy the kit, and you don't have to build it. Which speaks to the point that Mark Zenos made in the chat. You've got to love a dead module after 8 hours. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Totally.
So diving into specific modules, maybe nice to kind of start, you know, back end of a music, back end of the band, as it were. I'd like to start with percussion. Backbone of the percussion, kind of what's going on, what's the approach? Are you wanting a particular style? Was there a set of samples or drum machine that you've liked previously, or just looking for new sounds and kind of making your own kit, as it were? What's your approach to the drum section?
Yeah, great question. I have never, or with kind of the beauty of Modular, I was never interested in chasing like recreating a 909 or an 808 for anything specifically. It's really been about, you know, getting together a collection of modules that allow me to bring a certain weirdness, like a quirky, happy weirdness to the percussion part of my case. But also things that can do a pretty straight and narrow drum sound. I really actually like acoustic drums. When I make music with my hardware, I use addictive drums too. So I felt like I like acoustic drums. I like that balance of the acoustic instrument balance against a lot of the heavy electronic stuff that makes up the melodic side. So I gravitated a lot towards all of WMD's drum modules. They seem to fit that aim. They share that aim with their modules, like Fracture, Chimera, and Crucible. They all are capable of making things that are mimicking either like a traditional acoustic instruments, but then you've got so much modulation possibilities and different knobs that you can go from, you know, oh, this is the cymbal, to like, this is the alien spacecraft crashing into a dinosaur floating in outer space kind of a thing. So I find those great. Stuff like Akemi's Taiko, I love. That's got the ability to recreate a lot of different percussion instruments, but it's also, I feel like, totally its own thing. Probably my weirdest percussion instrument, and I'll call it that because it's in my percussion area, which is all along this row here, would be the 2HP Cat. Nice. Which I try to get into as many patches as I can, whether you know it was in there or not. Yeah, I waited for so long. I wasn't aware of it when those actually came out. So I like scoured the internet waiting for one of those to pop up, and finally got one. Yeah, so it's just kind of like, you know, like I've got a mutant snare for my snare drum. I'm using 2HP hats for my open and closed hi-hats, and then kind of a recent addition, but I'm very, very in love with its capabilities, is the SSF Entity bass drum
really
module
good.
as my kick. and I mean, it's like, I don't mean to read, like, it's so much more than this, but just one thing about it that I love, and I used it on Imaginary Friends, because it's so convenient, is, it has that negative envelope, the duck out, that just gives you, it's like you got your faux side chaining. Just just hook that up to a VCA, and then you can really dial it in with the rise and fall on it. But yeah, it's just so convenient to have that. Before, I was like using 2 channels of mass to like do an envelope follower and then invert it to get a faux side chain, and just to be able to take one patch cable out into my mixer and boom, side chain.
Really interesting kind of side point on that. There's an abstract data envelope, 5-stage AHDSR envelope. It's really nice. I'll pull a link up for the chat shortly. But its inverted envelope out is already offset, which is commonly called a mirror, as opposed to an invert. So if it's 0 to 5 volts, it doesn't flip down 0 to -5. It's still in 0 to 5, but just kind of a mirrored, or a flip. You sometimes hear it as a flip or a mirror as opposed to an invert. And I found that so handy. Of course, sometimes you do want the negative voltage. You want to pull lower than the point of whatever you're plugging it into. But I was really kind of impressed with that clearly had some thought behind it. And it wasn't just, oh yeah, we'll throw an inverted version on. I said, that's so damn handy. But yeah, I'm hoping Andrew at Steady State Fate does flesh out the entity line more, which is his percussion line. I've not had much time to play with the percussion synthesizer, which is similar in layout to this, but I absolutely love the bass drum. I think it's discontinued, and I did see in a stream, either I was in the live chat or a stream I was doing and someone said it in the live chat, that he's teased, at least to a couple of people, a smaller kick drum, like just a really focused, a little bit less scope maybe than this, but just like a really zoned in, this is the kick. And I thought that was quite exciting.
Yep.
But yeah, you can hear.
That's what I've heard.
There we go. Yeah, so it's a thing. I'm not making it up then. It's like questioning myself.
Yeah, I think I read it. Like, I think I read an Instagram comment where he alluded to it, or that he was aspiring to that at least.
I need to press him on that. When he's not building random steps, I'll wait it out, then I'll get to pressing him on that one. But you can hear this approach of, you're not, again, it's not mimicking that an 808, or even in the tuning of your mutant snare drum. I found, like I said, that caught my ear because it's panned right in the mix. I was like, oh, that's a nice, interesting take, and it just sits, but usually it's right down the center, so it was just this immediate like, ooh, like, what's going on? And I loved, even just as like, if it was an ear trick or just where you felt it should be done, like, anyone that's listening, do just put something that wouldn't normally be slightly to a side, and you're going to immediately catch my ear. At least I remember a friend that used to make quite early dubstep, did a kind of big monstrous drum fill into a drop or a transition in a piece, and it was played by Zane Lowe on Radio 1. Over here, he's getting quite a lot of traction at the time. And as the kick drums kind of went guns blazing just before the drop, he started panning the kick drums around. And Zane Lowe like threw his headphones off. You could hear it on there. It's like, whoa! Like, just threw it. It just stopped the track, like completely, like just obnoxiously stopped and wound the track back, which you don't hear radio DJs do that. Not on BBC Radio 1 anyway. And I was just like, he's nailed it. Like, just that little, like, just, and plenty of people will have panned kicks around before, and he did it really tastefully and interestingly. But yeah, any little kind of thing like that really catches me. But you can hear this drum line. There's an element of realness to it as well. How are you trying to approach the programming of them to play into that, to be less like an XOX box kind of programming? What are you, or what's the kind of process of sequencing that? Yeah.
My main percussion sequencer is the WMD Metron. But then I'm using a series of modules to also have the Checkmat 4 bricks Rook giving me hands-on control of four of my drum section modules. And in the case of Imaginary Friends, that was my kick, snare, open hat, and cymbal. And that actually became kind of one of the primary performance aspects of the piece. You might have already mentioned it, but when I do record, and the recording that you see in the music video, while there is a lot of editing involved, and I am jumping around angles, that was recorded all in one take, the music, and then 3 of the camera angles. And so, once I did it a few times, and the drums would have been different on every time because I'm playing so much of it by hand. But then once I just arrived at a performance that I liked, and that was it, and I went with it. But so that's between the Metron and the 4 Bricks Rook, that's what's driving my drum section.
Was there anything in place before the Metron? Not to get into like naming and shaming or being negative about any of this, but was there anything else before that was kind of leading to frustrations? Is that a module, and I say this because it seems to be for many people, that really opened up longer patterns and fills and kind of performing with mutes and all these things that Metron offers? It's such a dense rhythm sequencer. Were you approaching it in a different way maybe? I mean, we can name modules that didn't work for you. It's not a bad thing to talk about what works and doesn't, but
yeah,
was there a way of sequencing you tried that didn't work, or particular modules that just you couldn't wrangle personally?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to remember. I kind of like once I got a Metron, and that was the kind of similar experience of being the key that unlocked that aspect of songwriting for percussion. Metron had the same effect that Symphonian had. I think before I was really just using, like, I want to say, just a bunch of outs with Pams, and I was doing all my percussion like with Logic and clock dividers and multipliers. And I feel like I'm forgetting another key aspect of it, but it was less like, oh, I'm using, some particular module that I would call out and say it just didn't work for me. It was just like the most important thing for me was I was looking to be able to have patterns and jump to them on call, either by hand or in the case of Metron, through CV. And that's like something, once for a system this big to be playable in a traditional song form where I want a lot of things to change at the exact same time, it means that almost every new module I get, that the first thing I look for is like, can I control it to like switch to something completely externally with CV, instead of having to like control that module specifically, because it's like I've only got 2 hands, so I need a lot of things to be set up and pre-programmed to all switch at the same time. And Metron, is built to give you those different variations, and then give you the CV control to, jump to your next variation with an external trigger. Or just like in the case of Imaginary Friends, I actually, because I was using the longest, the full pattern length you could have, which I think is 128. I just had at the very end of the last couple bars, I would just I sent one of its triggers out back into itself, so it was self-triggering itself to jump to the next section at the end.
I just saying, that's like there's, I think it's called follow action in Ableton Live, where when you hit play down the right hand side to play everything on that row, that series of clips, you can set it up as follow action to move at a certain time, at 8 bars move down and so on. It's like automatic follow action of it's going to tell itself that when A is done, it goes to B, it goes to C. There's other sequences that I know the Eloquencer, you can kind of hold them down from this one to this one, and it will then just work its way through. And there's various ways of doing it. That's interesting that you're 128 step patterns and then still wanting them to chain through. Do they ring back at any point?
Yeah. At the very end, because it offers 5 different variations that you can jump between, and I find that I would really have loved 6 or more. So I do find that I'm butting up against the limitation of 5. So I think like when I get to the last variation, when the song's done and most stuff cuts out, like at that point it would sit there and loop on the last one and not jump back to the first part. But other than that, it was, they were all just chained to go. And in more typically in songs previous to this, I wasn't using the full 128. And I've experimented with different means to trigger to the next section. On the last song that I put out for Imaginary Friends called Frolic, which you can also watch on my YouTube channel, I had a voltage block down here before I had the 4 bricks. I can never say 4 bricks. Anyways, I had a voltage block here, and I was using not sequenced. I was just using a single channel, and I would, when I was ready to transition to a next section, I would just throw the channel up, and then I had that going to. Did I lose you? Oh no. Okay. So the audio just like did something weird in my headphones, so it seemed like I could no longer hear your ambient audio. Anyway, so I had a voltage block channel, and I would throw that slider up, and that was being molted out to a bunch of different places. To Metron, it would see that sudden voltage as a gate and trigger it to get ready to jump at the end of the bar to the next section. It was also that voltage was also opening up a VCA, which was letting a filter sweep, because it's kind of like a riser that was looping in time to all the bars, but you just couldn't hear it. And then so when I opened that voltage block gate and opened that VCA, then I was like, okay, I'm triggered to the next section, and now you're going to hear this riser coming up to help transition us to the next section. I think it was doing something else too, but so that's one way of solving like a single control, which helps to trigger a bunch of different things that are needed for an interesting transition between parts. What I have in here right now, and I would have used it had I not ended up doing, not needing it on Metron, but I got the Doper foot switch controller, and I was going to free up a hand, and I could just, tap the foot switch with my foot, which would send a trigger or a gate to Metron to switch the section.
It's interesting we don't see that many kind of foot controller ways of kind of integrating into a system. It seems like such an obvious thing. When I was playing electronic drum kit with a band, kind of at times Massive Attack-ish, a little bit more dancey at times than that for anyone curious, I would have a couple of just foot switches, either latching or momentaries, that would be assigned to do different things. One of them might just be a tap tempo. I was playing to a click and it being electronic, and playing a MIDI kit into a laptop that I didn't need to look at, was kind of out of the way, but that was just a setup we had to play these produced pieces of music. And the guitarist would be leaning in like he would in a kind of rock band, really into it, like wanting to push it, and you can feel him pushing you forward, and you're just like, man, I'm tied to a grid in headphones with earplugs in and then headphones over the top. I can't move, that is just, I'm tired. Like I was MIDI syncing the keyboard player's rig, so all these like ping pong delays on what I was playing was in time and all that kind of stuff. But you could feel it was this live act that wanted to move, so I just had to put it so I could just stamp that left foot down like I was playing the hi-hat, just like I need to be able to push this on quarter notes and just tell the computer that it's going to move. And tempo ramps and things like that, being able to hit something and have things start to change, either cues that I might have been hearing or shift down to patterns, or there was all sorts of like shaker loops and stuff like that just made no sense to play. A bit like when you get I guess you get it in all sorts of music, but pop or country even, like someone just frantically shaking a tambourine through a chorus makes such a difference. Uh, However in time it is, just the energy of just that frantic backing singers with tambourines kind of vibe. For anyone that gets into that kind of thing, search for stems. If you search for a famous song you like and put multi-track stems, you'll find all sorts of things, which may be a bit naughty to rip off the internet, but do it and remove the tambourine and you kind of see what I mean. it's so insignificant seemingly, but then so important. So yeah, I had foot switches for all that kind of stuff to try and orchestrate ways of doing it. I've never really got into it with Modular. An expression pedal, a little bit. A company called Seven Dials makes the CV Express, which will pull every conceivable version of a voltage out of a pedal. Thresholds for triggers and gates and inverted versions and different scaled versions. I think it's 8 HP. That works incredibly well. But yeah, I just don't see it that kind of well integrated. Don't forget the cowbell. Yeah, there was a cowbell occasionally. There's always a little bit of a cowbell, Mark. Just to say hello again to the live chat. I'm watching as we go and I've been pulling your questions out. If you tag me, if you write @DivKidVideo in the chat, it flashes up red, as you can see now in my version of the live chat on screen. That's easy for me to pull your questions out. So for anyone watching live, just keep them coming and we'll keep breaking off to answer them. On that note, I'd like to take some questions because they've been mounting a little bit. We'll come to the Symphonian again shortly anyway, because naturally it's just going to work its way that way. But catch
all roads lead to Symphonian.
Catch the Hair said he spoke to you about they spoke to you about seller's remorse selling the Cursus Atiritas. Have you regretted selling anything or rebought a module after understanding the system more?
I've been pretty lucky to have not sold anything that I regret too heavily. And the only module that I rebought, and it was recently, and actually I more regret the rebuy than selling it the first time, but is a Make Noise Tempi. I think it's a super powerful module. And I bought it, I sold it the first time. It was like my master clock, and basically Pam's replaced it. So I sold it the first time, and that was, a couple years ago. And then one of the videos that inspired me the most to get into modular was a Fact Mag. I believe it was Fact Mag. It was about a 10-minute video, and they went to Caitlin Aurelia Smith's studio and interviewed her, and then filmed her doing a small performance and talking about her patch. And even though it's not really the type of music that I make now, there's something about that piece. I love the way that she works with voices, and she's using the tempi really to just like, I think she's, for the most part, for most of her voices, like she's not even using envelopes. She's just, everything's gated and it's just on off. And she's at times, I think she'll, tweak through the different preset, the different relationships, polyrhythmic relationships that the tempi excels at. And I just had an inspiration to like, make my own version of something like that. And it probably would have come out totally different. It would have been a second breakfast version, but just to kind of like starting from that base, like taking my Pams out and putting that back in and working with the limitation of gates and almost like at that point, like the melodies, the melodic voices are also the percussion. So I put it in my case and I went to do it, and I was just it all came back to me how much I struggled with memorizing the button combos and how lost I got so fast. I probably tried for like 2 hours, and then I took it out and I said, maybe, I'm not going to sell it again, but I'll push that experiment down the line.
Yeah, I mean, different things speak to us, and as you say, it might be that later on it feels different in time as well. Mark Zeno asked, have you got any noise issues in that case and setup?
Surprisingly, no, which is something that kind of shocks me. I never even I wasn't diligent about like checking my power consumption. I just looked at this thing and it like, especially this middle 4 case, or 4 rows. And it is like the latest, power board version of Dope, like the PSU3. And I was like, my assumption was like, that thing's got to have plenty of power. So, didn't even check it. I've never had an issue. There is one thing that is a key element of my system, which does have a little, like I do experience issues with bleed with it. But I just have learned to work around it. But that's a module that I'd love to chat about. It's the most unassuming utility, but it is a super, like, here's Symphonian and Metron, and it's the importance of it in my system is like, it's up there on the list too. Not above it, but below it. But we can come back to that.
Let's save it. The sacred, the one that bleeds, that's so important. Yeah, let's keep some suspense with that. We'll come to that shortly. I didn't catch who, but I copied the question into my notes. How are you using the Music Thing Modular Turing machine?
Good question. The answer is that I'm not. And if we had a point in the chat where we talk about how this case is going to evolve after I take this patch down, that is one thing that's going out. But I can speak on how I was using it up until recently. So you'll see there's a hole here, and that's only recent because I just sold one module here. And I was going to get into this if we kind of talked about the way my case is arranged so that it's ergonomic and arranged in a logical flow for me. But to jump ahead of that a little bit, I'm going to switch over to my other view here. So this row here and a little bit here, you would call this like my sequencing row.
Yep.
And I put this here for ergonomics because it's something that I'll spend a lot of time interacting with. And so when I'm standing up, it's like minimal strain on my arms to be working here. But when I first put that together, I kind of had this like subsections within that. This was my, hey, I want to program every note and percussion hit like to a T in the traditional sense. I know where everything goes. Yes, these can do some probability, but I really just use them as like, this is when I want to chisel it in stone and I want it to play exactly what's in my head. And then I had this section over here, which was more my generative random kind of section. And so with the Turing machine here and marbles, and then there was a bloom here, that was my, like, I was still kind of dabbling in like, do I like making ambient music? And so that's oh, Siri wants to repeat that. So that was, that's why I've had the Turing machine in there. It was like, if I was doing ambient generative stuff, once I stopped doing that, then I will occasionally use it as like kind of a loopable random for CD. Try piping that into something just to give it some extra life that's loopable. But it had a lot of appeal early on, before I got a Symphonian. How I would use it was, I would use it in conjunction with the Hermod, Squarp Hermod, because the Hermod has 4 assignable CV inputs. And one of those things you can assign them to is to record CV. So I would do what I called melodic fishing, and I would send the main out and gate of the Turing machine, and then I had the expander, so I would send out maybe like one of the variations, and I would sit there and let it run. And then if I found something I liked, I would lock it, and then I'd record it into her mod and use it to build songs that way. So that was a cool way to like take something which, you know, is sort of repeatable, but then if you turn off your system or you let it go, then it's gone. But this way I could like use it for its strength of coming up with interesting ideas on its own, and then really like take them and you know, marry them and keep them.
I love that idea of melodic fishing. That's really cool. We'll keep blasting through a few questions before we get into the layout of the system. And module choice as well. Stu J asked, do you ever synthesize your own percussion or just prefer to save the time with drum modules?
Yeah, I prefer to save the time and the rack space. You know, like from one way of looking at it, I have ample space, but I really feel like I'm using all of that for modules that are serving a specific purpose. And so, you know, creating percussion by hand using, you know, creating it through subtractive synthesis. That's kind of falls into the DIY. The reason why I don't DIY is just like, I'll choose to spend my time on other stuff. And there's so many great modules that are built for percussion that I haven't felt the need like I'm lacking anything.
It's really nice when Bafako released the Kick All module, and I remember asking them at Super Booth the first time I saw it, and I think it was on camera doing the typical trade show kind of video thing with them, and Manu, or maybe it was Diego, said that Kick All is effectively the patch that they would make to make a kick drum. So it's not an 808, it's not a 909. It wasn't based on anything circuit level. It was literally, I take an oscillating filter and I put it into a VCA, and these are the type of decay envelopes I use. Oh, but I like modulating decay, so we need to put a CV in for that decay slider. I know it's really nice when we put a wave folder on the end, so we can add some harmonics to it. And it was literally this patch that would have maybe been a whole row, or a row and a bit, maybe even, depending on how they were modulating it, just shrunk down. And that was what defined the circuit, as opposed to here's how you make a twin T-bridge 808 circuit, or whatever it could have been based on. And I thought that was really cool.
That is really cool. I totally appreciated that logic of what, you know, of building a module. That's cool.
Dual Tracks asked, what about the preset by Polyend? Is it useful in a real sense of the word? I don't know what I was going to say. I'm not sure what that ending means. As to it looks immediately useful. Is it? I think is the question.
Yeah, it's still a little bit TBD for me to answer that 100%. I actually have two of them. I just don't have them both in. But the reason why I do have it is that I'm hoping, or I'm predicting, will be another key module in the next goal that I have with the system, which I think we're planning to talk about, which is to have multiple songs patched to be able to play like a 30-minute to an hour-long set. My thought is that the Polyend preset and the pair of them, once I bring the other one in, will, you know, be able to serve a pretty crucial function in that regard. So I will definitely let everybody know how useful it is once it comes time.
And just to share the page, I'll share the link again. You've got some patch breakdown bits on your YouTube channel as well. You've got some more coming soon. Pretty much right after this stream, I believe. Some more content to come, so people go subscribe, go like the videos and leave comments and all that kind of good stuff that helps. There's loads more to come. I was just going to say I really like this idea of it being multiple patches, because they're in depth as we said, sections, transitions. There's a hell of a task to do more than one of at once.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like the way that I feel about it. Like at this point, I feel like it's possible. But in terms of a challenge, both technically and creatively, it like the way that I feel about that, about, having 3, 4, 5 songs patched all at the same time and being able to like have, all this system of switching and rerouting and presets and all that kind of stuff. Like it feels as daunting as it did to me to just create a system that could do fully featured, basically pop songs all within Modular. So I'm nervous but also excited and motivated to like, to solve that puzzle and to make it happen. So that's kind of like my next big long-term goal for Second Breakfast project.
Analog Kid asked, what parameters do you tend to automate with the Catalyst module?
I'd say I've hoped to animate more things with it, and actually another thing in the evolution of this case after this patch goes down is I actually got a second Catalyst, and with that one I got the flow version, which has the more like really like DJ style fader on it that's really quick, and my hope is that by utilizing 2 of them, that I can use the faster one that's going to like be a playable hands-on element for like within a section, adding some sort of life or hands-on organic feel to like a particular element that's not just being like, this element should sound like this in section A and then like this in section B, which is how I've typically used Catalyst in the past. But to speak on how I've typically used it, it's like I'll use it to have a transition element that you can hear that doesn't just like switch over in a blink. So something like a filter sweep. That's how I use it in Imaginary Friends. There's like a high pass. And then I use that to then like slam it back down when the next section came, for that nice contrast of volume and then just the, filter sweeps always sound great. But then I'll also use it to open up a VCA that's controlling some sort of maybe more secondary melodic line, some sort of high line, something twinkly, that is like not in one section. And then when I sweep the Catalyst slider over to the other side, then suddenly it's letting through these extra elements of the track, which you didn't hear on the other side. It's the last thing I'll say about it is like the hardest thing that I've found to perform with it is that in the heat of the moment, I do find it hard to like assign the different presets to the different sides. So it's kind of like if you're on one preset when the slider's on one side, and then you push it over to the other, then nobody can hear any changes that you make to the side you were on. So that's your opportunity to change what presets it's going to go back to when you slide it back. And with everything else going on, I do find it a bit tricky to like stop what I'm doing and do a button combo to do that kind of changes. So, I've typically only used like only one preset on one side and the other. So I'm not really getting the full use out of it, but maybe that's just an element of practice and familiarity.
Final question for now. There's some more that keep coming, but just to keep kind of rolling through the bits we want to hit, and we'll keep breaking off for questions. Again, I didn't catch who, but the question was, what would be the first things you would get for your system if you were to start from scratch? Tough question.
I mean, like knowing what I know now, as if like I mean, the obvious answer is like just my favorite modules would be Symphonian, Metron, Hermod, performance mixers, pressure points, reverb. Oh, and any Birdkit stuff. I have like a semi-recent just love affair with all of the Birdkit stuff, and I don't know if it has anything to do with the fact that because they're not really at this point going to be making anymore. So I have this like tendency to want to like, ooh, like I want to like have them all, but I don't know. There's just something about them that really speak to me. It's like, you know, with the Batalea, I'm not pronouncing that right, but and then with the Raven, like it's got this inspired by Moog kind of thing going on, but then it is also its own thing. And there's something about that those design choices and everything that I really like a lot.
Yeah, Michael's work, Mike work is great. Like AGH for me, which does then lean up even more so on the Moog thing. Of course, they've got the Mini Mod range, which is Mini Moog based or Mini Moog based. Of course, with extra things in there and more patch points and that. But yeah, the Bird Kids, I know what you mean. There's just that, the Bertelier voice, the Raven, and there's just something about them. And it's going to be subjective and different for everyone, but there's these things that just seem to just feel right, and you can't always put it into words. You just know that it's clear. You know, if something was genuinely bad, which I think there's very little air quotes bad modules, but some things really just hit a mark. Personally, sometimes that might be Schweman for someone, Schweman to someone else. Although you can appreciate its quality, just might not speak to someone. But yeah, Mike's work, I would say, is very underrated. It's nice to see, thinking of Colin Benders again, it's nice to see him with multiple Bird Kids voices going on.
He's probably
got what's left of them.
Of Raven. He's got a flock. I think he bought like 15. I think he was like one of the people during the Kickstarter where you could like buy the obscene, like buy a 15 pack of Raven.
Kind of aimed at stores, like, hey, if you want to stock this, but Colin just sweeps in. But as you say, buys the flock. Yeah, that is crazy, but it's such a great synth voice. So we'll move forward with the kind of talking points we had in mind. Again, before we've dived into specific modules a little bit, we have the sacred one that bleeds. I'm going to make note of that. The sacred one that bleeds. That got some laughs in the chat that we immediately brought it up and we moved straight on. We'll come to that. But yeah, arrangement for modules was the talking point that we spoke about, and I'll pull Modular Grid up again. So people have a nice clear image, and again I'll put that in the live chat. You spoke about the sequencing, which we often see at the kind of front of the system, the bottom row. It's the thing that people's right in front of their hands, but in a system this vertical and this big, you said that's like straight in front of you is the kind of like less physical strain for sequencing. So as I scroll up and down the modular grid that people can see, we've got drums towards the bottom, mixing towards the bottom, 4 bricks rook, pressure points, the catalyst, the performance elements at the bottom. As we work up, we then work into other bits of processing, filters, crushers, delays, clouds, effects, and then into the sequencing. What's the idea? Do the effects get much of a look in terms of physical movement? You know, you're grabbing at Magneto or the Lo-Fi Junkie, or is that a kind of physically performed area of the case for you, or is it just a case of patching into those and it's left alone?
Yeah, and it's a bit of both, just depending on what I need for a song. But I would say its position. I'm going to switch to my other angle here. Its position in my case is more motivated by signal flow first. In that, you know, as audio signals emerge from the thing that bleeds, which I'm going to have to spill the blood soon here to like talk about how this is laid out. But let's just say a big river flows here. And so conveniently, a river that's flowing towards towards my performance mixer and then out emerges in the forest of effects here. And but they also happen to be at a very playable area. So I do find myself like, if I'm looking for some little cool effect to tweak on, like in Frolic, I was bit crushing with the Prism, and which is right here, and so just really convenient to get to. But yeah, so first motivated by position, but then lends itself to hands-on control.
Controllers to do that, or yeah, if you're so yeah, is it the case of synth voices are up there because they're less interacted with?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think they are less interacted with. I mean, they're certainly not like something I usually like, it's the time that I spend dialing it in to get the sound, which is a little more of like trial and error, like letting it like tweak some knobs, send some volt per octave into it, or like play. I typically like try to find my melodies using just the Arturia key step here into her mod, so I can just play and get instant feedback on how something sounds. But it's that I don't typically find that I have to leave my arms up for extended periods of time, versus like there's something about programming, step programming. You need to hang there longer, and so that's how voices ended up at the top. And should I just jump into kind of giving you like my logical flow at this point?
We've generally
we've
generally softly spoken about where things are. If you want to dive into your setup, your flow, and I'll bounce between you being full screen and modular grid so people can see.
Okay. Yeah, because I think you explained it kind of practically, just if you were like reading a book or something, kind of from like bottom to top. But really, the flow, like if I think it'll be helpful for me to explain it like by the way that the river
your
flows.
approach, actual signal flow, as opposed to like bookcase sections, which was exactly how I looked at it from a distance. So the actual flow from how you start as well would be interesting if we can frame that around where that start of a patch is for you. What is the trickle? What is the stream that creates this river flow through the system?
So I'll back up just briefly to say that I have tried every possible combination that I can think of, or like logic and layout. Starting with kind of what you talked about, and just going through blocks like, everything should flow in a direction. So sequencing and everything starts here, and then how all those signals logically flow, and then ending up with mixers and out here. But the problem is you just end up with some aspect of that which is not very ergonomic or playable. I've tried like a left to right thing, and then the other big thing that I'm constantly contending with is just minimizing huge blocks of like, I don't want all my patch chords seeming to have to go into one area. Like, one thing that's unavoidable is like audio ending up at the mixer. That's probably my worst bunch of cables. But so anyways, I tried everything and I finally arrived at this. And I try to just think of like, what's the perfect place to have X function in a system. So my master clock is right in the center. That's something that, multiple modules throughout the system use. And rather than trying to have like that clock down here or up here or whatever, and then ending up in periods where I would, or in situations where I would need to send, tons of really long patch cables from one corner to the other, the most logical spot for clocks and resets is just right in the center. And then it's equidistant to spread out to whatever might need it. After that, like I've already talked about, my sequencing section is all here, and that's based on ergonomics of saving my arms because I'm going to be going to it at all times. Also, for visual cues when I'm performing, I'm watching like, both Hermod and also on Metron, like the count. So that's, being pretty close to eye level is really helpful for keeping track of where I am performing. After that, signal flow wise, it's like, generally all sequences are flowing into Symphonian first. So that kind of goes up this way. And then from Symphonian, everything just goes up. And 90% of my voices are here. I've got a few spill over here. But these are also modules. It's like the Similis, Plonk, and Plates, which can serve both as percussion or as melodic voices. So that's another logic to them sitting there. But so volt per octave, CV, and triggers are flowing now from my sequencing section through Symphonian and then up to my voices. I generally have like envelopes and stuff here, but then I try to put, the oscillators and stuff on the outside, because that's usually just like a single volt per octave going to those. And then things start to flow. The signal flow goes back in this way. Oscillators into filters, into mixers, and then the envelopes can connect in to where they need to get connected in, depending on how I'm using them. And then now it's time to talk about the thing that bleeds, which then all my signal flow comes right into here. And this is the Rack Plumber HD by Plume or Plum Audio. They're UK based, I'm pretty sure, because I've had to order them always from UK. I haven't found them for sale in the US, but this unlocked the key of ergonomics in terms of minimizing tons of patch cables. Because the problem with breaking up a system this way and not flowing just like from top down or bottom up or left to right is then you end up with these points in your signal flow where, like, if I didn't have that, all my voices would need to then drop all these long cables all the way down either to my effects section or into my mixer. So suddenly I just have this waterfall of patch cables, which gets in the way of everything. But with the Rack Plumber HD, that has 18 patch points, which can send CV or audio signals to its sister module, which is identical, that's down here in the bottom of my case, via HDMI. And so I want to also clarify that when I talk about the bleed, I don't think that is any fault of the Rack Plumber itself. It's purely a limitation of the HDMI. I think like I should experiment with trying to find the most high quality HDMI cable I can find, but I think the bleed is happening because of the
I
cable.
wonder if they're just not.
But,
I don't know enough about those kind of I mean, it's not a digital use case in this, but typically digital cables, Cat5, Ethernet, HDMI, that kind of thing. If individual kind of lines aren't particularly well shielded in comparison to lots of separately shielded patch cables, I'm not sure. But just to speak to that point with the Rack Plumber, I've used other Ethernet or Cat5 based versions of this kind of thing with a 12U live system that I was using last year, and just to be able to, because the case would fold out, but if I wanted to put the two cases side by side, I'd have to use longer cables than I would want, so I could shut the case, open the case, physically take the lid off and put it by its side, and just having 8 10, 12, whatever the amount is on that module or multiples, and just going with an Ethernet cable, case 1 to 2, and maybe one more time if it was a decent amount of cables or signals. Made a huge difference. Just to know that, just the weight of the cable, even in a 12U system, just the weight and drape of so much cable coming over is kind of huge to get rid of as much of that as possible. There's a module,
Absolutely.
I think it's called the trunk lines, or the trunk from CGS, which was ribbon cable based. That was, I think, 8 in and out, with the idea that you could run it internally. You'd run this thick, fat ribbon, kind of like from point to point in a large case, I guess corner to corner or something like that. That's one I've seen people run right across rooms. It's very much something I'm thinking of for the larger studio setup to come at the end of the year, with the building work I'm having done and the new kind of studio build. That what do I need to really, because it's going to be a studio system, slightly different approach to you here, but I'm still going to have that same need of, there's got to be a ton of signals that just need to move physically across a large distance, and I'm not running like 2-meter cables times 16. It's just so awkward. So anyone in the chat that's used other kind of patching solutions, I'd be curious for people's experiences on that. MV Dirty mentioned the ADAC one. They use ribbons as well. I've heard good things about that one as well. Any other options, let us know in the chat. But yeah, sorry to kind of jump in with the flow. So we've got to the rack plumber handling all this signal flow further down into the effects section.
Yeah. And a couple more things I love about the rack plumber is it has actually, you can hook the HDMI cable in on the front or the back. So it has, you can connect it either way. So if you just needed to run it from like one case to another, then you can run it from the front. But if you're running it within a single case, then you can hook it into the back, and then it just keeps, a big HDMI cable from being in the front. That's also something that I've been, trying to avoid at all costs, is having anything that's not a patch cable, like running, anywhere on the in the middle of my case. I do have 2 other of the Dopefer A189s, which are the Ethernet ones, which I think you're probably thinking of when you're, or that are commonly thought of for doing this kind of thing with Ethernet. But I have those on the very edge of my case, so that the Ethernet cable I can kind of just tuck back, and it really doesn't stand out or get in the way. So anyways, so that the rack plumber is just a key module for minimizing patch cable clutter. So all those signals that come from here, generally audio signals, come out down here, and from here they can either go straight into my mixer or through an effect and then down into my mixer. And that kind of explained, we've kind of already talked about, this is generally like effects and modulation all around in here. And then on a sort of like a parallel path would be the signal flow out of Metron into my percussion area, which is the signals, all the triggers from here are using one of these Dopefer A180-9 Ethernets to send all those triggers down from here, and then jumping down to the sister component to this one. And then I can send all my triggers out across the drums this way. And then, down in here, the 2 performance mixers, the one on the left is for my drums, and then the right is for melodic voices. And then the most important hands-on control are down here, being the pressure points, which control the chords, what chord Symphonian's playing, the 4-Bix Rook to play some percussions up by hand, and then the catalyst for transition.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know that I've had similar conversation with Chris Meyer on streams, and certainly lots of other people outside of streams as well, that it's easy to kind of think, oscillators in one section, which was Chris's way of working, and oscillators go into filters or folders or processors, and then they go into VCAs. but then you can so easily kind of like just push the modulation out of the way. It's like you say, so you're then chaining this huge fan of things up or to the side of a case. But then it can also be somewhat restrictive to totally box things in like a voice. You know, that this oscillator filter VCA envelope is effectively then like this little semi-modular thing you don't touch. It just seems you found a nice balance of kind of points to fan out from and ways of managing that.
Yeah. And I'll just to, you know, as just a funny comment on it, like when I've watched your live streams with Chris and building his case, and like and I see the logic he's going with it, and I'm just like, tried that, dude. You're not gonna like it.
Yeah.
Like it.
Yeah.
Like, play with it for a while, but you'll be pulling all those out and rearranging. Yeah. No, but I mean, you know, obviously to each people's priorities are different, and that's the beauty of the modular. There's no single way to do it, but yeah, been there, done that. This is the way.
Yeah, I mean, Chris has an amazing history of all sorts of kind of wonderment we don't need to dive into particularly, but I'm sure it would. I think that will be the right way for Chris and his mindset. Knowing Chris, I didn't immediately think you're not going to be happy, but it's funny that's kind of your gut reaction, having put so much into making your system work that way. And I know for others, like I said, maybe tying things down in a semi-modular-esque fashion, that sometimes just really works. And it's a good point, an important point to. That's fine too. It came up recently, a conversation I saw about, don't just rebuild a mono synth in Eurorack. It's not an exciting thing to do. And it's like, well, it could be really exciting. It could be that someone wants an MS-20, but they want 4 oscillators. And it's like, well, if they can do that, and they never, like, literally do not move a patch cable again, it's cool too. It's maybe not my approach, but I know I mentioned ADH in the mini mod earlier. There's a good amount of those customers that just really appreciate how authentic it is to the first RA Moog designed mini Moog. There's a few variations if people weren't sure. The earlier designed oscillators that people just do not move them. And there's a good amount of customers that that's their way of having maybe a mini Moog, and maybe the one that they take out live, while the original one that's nearly 60 years old doesn't leave the house. And that's cool too. So yeah, it's a good point. We did have a question specifically, like, how much is the crosstalk over the HDMI line for audio on the Rack Plumber? You mentioned working around it, so is it not too bad?
It's not too bad. I can't say this with like scientific evidence and definition, but the only time it seems to be a problem, it's like if I have a voice that is really high voltage, or like it's like just really hot, lot going on. That's when I'll, like, on this last on Imaginary Friends, it was actually the Bird Kids, which was, for whatever reason, just pumping out a lot of voltage, and I just simply removed that. That's like the one long patch cable I'm using. I just took it out of the Rack Plumber, and it comes down all by itself. It goes into a doper and then down. But and as soon as I pulled that out, then I had no other problems. And I still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I don't think all of those are obviously not voices, but CV, mix of CV and voices. I still have 9 things running through the Rack Plumber, and there's no bleed at all on it. So I've, like, it for kind of ending up making a joke about that it bleeds, to define it. I really want to emphasize that, like, I also said that it's like so important to me that it's like Symphonian and then that, like, I highly recommend it. And it's just, I honestly think it's just the limitation of HDMI, and I think I just need to pony up and, like, buy, like, the ridiculous kind of like audiophile version of an HDMI cable, like $100 3-foot HDMI cable, and like just see if that's what it needs.
Yeah,
what
if you do that in the future and it works, you need to put up like a huge, not snake oil, like, you know, clickbaity picture of you holding this $100 cable. So I'm definitely curious if that changes it or not. I'd like to just break off slightly, and then we'll come to key modules afterwards, and then we'll kind of not round up, but we'll look to finish on and then answer all the questions we may have missed with where things are heading. The second Symphonian, a matrix mixer in there, and utilizing presets, as you say, to build multiple songs in one given kind of huge patch for a performance. But you mentioned that your professional background has been film, video, photo in the music business. And commercial work that has definitely influenced Second Breakfast and the visual style. All these little characters by the div squid, the wildebeest, and the little skeleton that I've crowbarred into your into your graphics. You know, the animation, the video is great. And just before we get onto it, there's one more clip I'd like to play. Another 60-second clip. This a slightly different cut from the Imaginary Friends video. I'll play that in, and then it'd be great to just touch on some of the film and video work as well. So just while we're on the topic, somebody mentioned Creston HDMI cables. Alfredo, thanks for that. You can't put links in the live chat, anyone that is here, but I'll certainly put the links to these in afterwards. Maybe they'll work well. Creston HDMI cables. If there's a particular model, that may be handy. I'm really curious if it's worth spending the money. We just had Brett, someone in the live chat mentioned Creston HDMI cables.
Creston? I'm writing that
Crestron. I've pulled a link up, so I'll be sure to send you a link when we're done.
Okay.
But that would be, cool. Yeah, I'm really curious what difference that makes.
Well, definitely, yeah. I will. I mean, as long as they're, you know, in the no more than 3-figure price range for it, I'll try it. I mean, if we're talking $1,000 HDMI cable, then we'll never know, unless somebody else wants to do it. But yeah, I'm definitely willing to try it, because I kind of also leading into where we're headed, or you know, whatever with what's next. I have a second one. I'll be running two of the Iraq plumbers. So I'm all, you know, to get a non-bleeding HDMI cable will be important.
So the professional work then, I mean, there's all these bits of animation in there. I mean, the video's shot beautifully. It's clear that there's some background in that. How did that start, and how's that led into this Second Breakfast project?
Yeah, I mean, at the start of the stream, I think I talked about one motivation for getting into music was to exercise some different types of creativity, you know, stop doing such visual work and instead work with my ears and sound and music. And that's obviously the basis of the project. It's about the music. And then once I but once I came around to being like, okay, I'm ready to start sharing the stuff that I'm making, I couldn't help myself but to bring my background in the visual side into the music, and how, what that was going to take an important role in the project of Second Breakfast, and in the music. So yeah, so I mean, I wish I could. The problem is that I probably spend too much time and effort in making the videos that I put out, and there's like a lot of time. Other people can pump out their content faster, but it just I can't help myself but to like imagine, how much, what can I bring to this visually, and how can I tell a story visually that's taking place with a guy in his basement with a whole bunch of modules in front of him. Like for each song, the idea is that I'm going to like use lighting and editing and bringing things like animation, and whatever else that ends up feeling appropriate for a song. But I'm kind of like I feel like Second Breakfast is, just because of my background and what I like is this, the visuals are as important as the music in my mind, at least. So it's kind of a total package versus like, just about the music. Like I don't have my music anywhere on like Bandcamp or just as music. Like it's meant to be watched and listened to. So I'm really putting a lot of care and trying to like put out content that has a lot of care and enjoyment built into the visual side.
I mean, it's clear as day. I just put the link for Imaginary Friends in the live chat. Again, that will all be in the description. I'll maybe pin a comment as well. Certainly for anyone watching not live, do leave a comment. I'll guide you to anything we've spoke about best I can, and worst case, I'll ask Brett directly if he can maybe provide a link to something that I can't find. But it is what it is. The content is what it is. And if you being you means we get something once a blue moon or once a month rather than someone else that's pumping things out once a week, I don't care. And people just be you is always the kind of thing that I like to see. And it's clear that is what it is. And it's a beautiful thing to watch. And if that means that I've got to hold out for another song for a while, that's fine. I don't want it dimming down in any, I don't want it dimming down in any way.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, I spoke earlier, we were speaking earlier about some of my content, which is a conversation we don't need to get into. And there's always, things I want to improve and that kind of thing. But there's always this thing as people get into content creation of feeling they need to steer it towards what others are doing. And it catches all of us, however experienced we are, as, I've seen a lot of people doing this and maybe that's what I should be doing or looking to do. And we all have our own voice. And I think that's the thing we need to stick to. Even if it's a wiggly path around it, it's this kind of recognizing what makes Second Breakfast. A question we had that's somewhat relevant before we dive into modules rather than keen for later. User Friendly asked, where does the name come from?
The name is a Lord of the Rings reference, and it is in the race within the Lord of the Rings universe on Middle Earth. One of them is hobbits, and they're these small in stature but big in heart people who, they're not really like major players in the world at all, but then in the story they obviously become one of the most important people in Middle Earth. But I feel like I'm assuming most people have at least know what Lord of the Rings is. But the reason why I picked that name is because I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan, obviously, to me, it evokes this idea of second breakfast. Whether or not you know the reference, it evokes something like that is either about indulgence, or there's just something inherently like silly or laid back or not taking itself too seriously about it in my perception. And then if you know that it's from Lord of the Rings, that's very much what hobbits are about. And, you know, when I think of hobbits, I think of like being in the Shire, this beautiful English-esque countryside kind of place that's idyllic, and it's about good feelings and warm hearts and all that kind of stuff. And that's, you know, that's kind of what I want to like make dance music that also makes you feel good and evokes that sense of friendliness and feel good kind of attitude towards
For
life.
me, I got the Lord of the Rings, but it was definitely waking up on a weekend, lazy morning, like coffee on, you've had breakfast, and then literally like a couple of hours later being, I'm going to put my feet up and grab some cereal. It was definitely that angle you mentioned. I was just like, yeah, it's a weekend, like answering the door to the mailman in a dressing gown, like still with a bowl of cereal in the hand. There's definitely that kind of, indulgent laziness, which is just worked well for me. But the Lord of the Rings reference, there's mention of it being a Tolkien reference as well. In the we should get onto modules specifically. We wanted to dive. We have a little bit, and we maybe don't need to spend that long because we have a bit. But key modules is something I'd like to talk about, and of course the Symphonian, which we're endlessly teasing by not really diving into. But we'll hold that for a second, because Mark Zeno asked, "What's your approach to complex oscillators?" He mentions that you've two very different ones from what I can see, and he was interested to know your relationship with them.
So the one that I have in now, unless I'm not thinking of something, the traditional complex oscillator that I have in my case is the further generator, which is new. This is the first patch. And I didn't actually really use it that much. It was just helping. There was like a filter sweep at one point, and I was just adding some character to it, kind of like mixing, like using LFO on one of the oscillators and then into some non-tuned thing on the other, just making it sound weird and interesting. But the complex oscillator that I've had for the longest time, up until a month or two ago, was the DPO, which was one of the few remaining modules, along with math, that were part of the original shared system that I started with. And I love everything about the DPO. I actually was just putting my oldest son to bed and watching a Div Kid video on the further generator. And it was I got this used, and then I swapped out to the what is it? It's called the Demon Core, or the what's the the digital core that you can swap, which allows for through zero FM, and that's what really sold me on it, because the DPO, for all of the great things it can do, doesn't have through zero FM. So that all of your awesome demos, and that video is super in depth, and you show a lot of different sides and. I'm having trouble hearing you. Siri keeps interrupting us. Anyways, so I suddenly found myself lusting after a further generator, thanks to DivKid, which I think, whether or not it's the further generator, is a common theme for just about everyone in the modular game. You made
me spend money is the general vibe. Not as nice to hear as you really taught me something. That's all the core goal, and I'm lucky that the companies I work with to demonstrate their products, which keeps a roof over my head ultimately, to be blunt about it. But they're all super into this idea that people will learn synthesis and patch ideas and musical ideas, and I'm super grateful I can frame it around that. I feel like I get to do my thing rather than just make like an advert. Of course, I know it's making people buy stuff, but that information and that education is the core of it. And I feel super lucky I'm kind of in that space working with people where they're like that. To speak to that, Joran at Your Analog said not too long ago, someone was like, "Oh, thanks for the video, Ben. I watched all of it and a little bit more of it twice, and it made me realise it's not for me. I've literally just taken it out of my basket. I was going to buy it, so thank you for saving me the money." And Joran jumped in and was like, that's great. It still served its purpose of showing you what this thing is and ultimately stopping you just selling it secondhand a couple of weeks later. And I thought, that's pretty cool. A company to come in and be like, I'm glad the video that I've funded made you not buy my product. And I thought that just speaks to like how cool a lot of the scene is. And he was just glad that it represented it in a way that they could gain that from it. It gives them enough to make them realise it's not for them. And I thought, you know what, that's really cool. And most people are behind these companies. But yeah, back to the Fervor Generator, it's a lovely bit of kit. The DPO's quite a different sound. I don't have a DPO in the system at the moment, but the Sputnik, the Verbos, the Fervor, they've all got just a different sound to them, even though they're all based on this Buchla 259 kind of classic makeup of a complex oscillator. Nope.
I don't know if anybody can hear. There's like a leaf blower just out, like very close to the window of my basement. So I apologize if that's what's oscillating instead of a synthesizer right
That's
now.
what I thought. I was watching to see if you just turned and not like, what's that? It's all right. It was a helicopter.
You're like, Fred, I told you we weren't going to do that. But yeah, you're totally right. And to be honest, like after being in bed with the DPO for so long, I am still learning this new mistress here, and I'm not quite as efficient with it yet. But I think another thing that drew me to it as well is that like I specifically like they have the cool black panel which they sell it now. I don't even think you can buy the gold one new. It's just all black panel. But I specifically like sought out the older gold one because what's on it, like these cool characters. I mean the characters are on the new one, but I don't know, the gold and the red and the blue are just funky and cool, and man, that'll always cool design aesthetics will always get me interested in a manufacturer, like all the All Right Devices stuff. I just love I love the characters and all the cool stuff in that design.
Yeah, so let's go Symphonian. It's the elephant in the room that we keep teasing. You mentioned earlier that thing's been a really important part of kind of pulling the theory and the musical approach to how you work, and you mentioned pressure points is controlling chord choices on there. Is that when you're making a patch, the thing I wanted to ask of it, at what point does it come into play? Is it literally sequencer into that and you're off? Or do you tend to work with drums first even? Or is it always kind of like go to the Symphonian, get this musicality happening, and you'll fan out from there?
Yep. So I'll answer your question, and then the video that I'm gonna turn on as soon as we're done with the stream here, you can watch firsthand because I filmed the entire process of making Imaginary Friends from the very start all the way through. I think it took around 18 total hours of patching spread out over multiple days. But I filmed like 3 different cameras the whole time, had like 40 hours of footage. And so you can see exactly what I'm about to talk about if that is any interest to anybody watching. But yeah, typically I'll throw down the most basic beat, just a kind of 4 on the floor kick snare thing, just something to like start to feel out my tempo, and then just a beat to play against. No fluff, maybe a little very generic kind of hat thing going on, just to have some energy. And then melodically from there, the very next thing I always go for is the chord progression. And that's because I sequence all my chord progressions by hand, even when I'm playing live. That's another core element of hands-on control that I do. I don't sequence the chord progression because I find it's just the harmonies I get so much emotional feeling out of them that feels like something at the heart of the music that I want to feel, that I feel connected to the music when I'm doing the chord progression, and I can improvise with it. Like whatever the final version of Imaginary Friends that you can watch in the videos, Like that was just the chord progression that I played that time. I played it differently before, and I was playing around with it last night, and I was like, oh wow, like I just was doing different of the 8 chords that I have available for hands-on control using the 2 pressure points. I wish I had an overhead system here, but the pressure points are connected, but they're not sequenced, and each pad I have dialed into a different chord in Symphonian, as well as the different CV channels that come off of pressure points. Those are controlling things like inversion, spread, and then voicing as well. So it's like, is it just using a 3-voice chord? If it's using the 4 total voices, like, am I doing something interesting, like a 9th or an 11th or something in there? Or as a whole, I'm also not limited to diatonic chords. So Imaginary Friends is primarily in C Mixolydian. Okay. And I just did that because I had spent some time recently like thinking about the Mixolydian scale, and it's a very like the Beatles used it, not like all the time, but it's pretty prominent. It's a pretty prominent element in a number of Beatles songs that give it a particular flavor. I don't think I really ended up extracting like a very clear identifiable like usage. I wasn't like plucking the string of Mixolydian to a point where it might stick out too much, but it was just, for me, I was like, I just wanted to like start on something that wasn't major or minor, and just as a way of like what unique qualities to this song might I get by using music theory, but stepping out of something that's the most typical you might hear. So it was like I kind of started arbitrarily, like, okay, I'm gonna patch up the chords of C Mixolydian, but then I also went through and I did some substitutions. So there's a couple chords in there that are definitely non-diatonic, that are borrowed as well for flavor. So the first thing I do is I've got drums going and I just sit there and I just jam, and it's so fast. I mean, that's what's so powerful about Symphonian is like you don't have any other voices going, just the chords and a little drum beat, and already it feels like more musical than I ever did of anything with Eurorack pre-Symphonian. It's just so easy, so quick, and there's other a lot of other modules that can, if we're talking about that function of Symphonian with period end, there are many other great modules that can do that. The Harmon the others are escaping, but that's not necessarily what's unique about Symphonian. But instantly, I'm playing this progression, and then I'll start to either put a bass line in or my main melody. And this is where the power of Symphonian comes in, because I can either just like sketch out basically like a melodic curved line. That could be an LFO. That could be I'm playing on the keyboard, improvising and changing chords. And if I've got a bass line and a melody, and then I change the chords, all the harmony with any other voice that's being played, everything shifts along with those chord changes, and it always stays in harmony. And that, to me, that's where the power of Symphonian starts to show, why it's the dominant module in my case. It just like I can so quickly start to develop a song that has all these different elements working in concert, working harmoniously. So I can experiment and just like program traditional song structures super fast, because it just handles keeping everything in harmony.
A couple of points that just speak to questions we had. You mentioned the Beatles. Someone mentioned the Yellow Submarine visuals with your animations. There's definitely conscious or subconscious or not a tie to some of that kind of graphic style, which is cool.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, wasn't a direct reference to it, but now that you bring it up, like totally. And you know, it's that bringing an element of joy, I think, is that's the shared characteristic there of like fun.
Absolutely. You've also answered the question that is not 007 had about no brains with pressure points, and that would be, I imagine, as you just said, because you play it, it's a case of having a series of chords that you play, so there's no intention of wanting to sequence them, right?
That's right. Yeah, and Symphonian has its own internal sequencer that I think would be easier. You know, you could use Brains to do that, but Brains is more set up to be either linear or to be like doing these loops, like getting stuck in loops and then jumping around. So if I did ever sequence my chord progressions, I would just use the internal sequencing function of Symphonian. Like right now, I'm using it, but I'm not sending a clock to it. I'm using it to be like, you know, if I sent a clock to it, I would have 8 different steps, and which are different chords. And the 8th being just a higher octave of my root. But then, so I make 8 steps in a sequence, but then I don't sequence it, and then I play it by hand.
Yeah. Yeah. Address them with the voltage instead. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of love for the Symphonian, of course, with Colin Benders. They're sold out. Lots of comments in the live chat about that generally. Where we just dipped out for questions, one that fits into what we're saying at the moment. Effects Music asked, are you improvising some parts or all of them, or are all of them arranged? We've touched on that at several points, but just to kind of firm up that idea of what you're improvising and what you're not, can you touch on that?
Yeah, it's different depending on the needs of a song. But so for example, on Imaginary Friends, that was the most, like, I had the most elements that were locked in. So it was like, you know, I'd have the bass line and the melody were locked in. They could feel improvised by, if I shift the chord, the harmony, I could make that melody, I could improvise the melody by association if I shifted it to a different chord at a different time. Then contrast that with the song I put out before that, Frolic, which I was improvising the chords as well as the bass line and melody. And by that, I do have a YouTube video where I break down how I control that. But I had, to sum it up quickly, that was primarily achieved using Planar 2. And I could kind of, like, with a single joystick control, I could control the density of gates. I had my gate and my volt per octave data separated. So I had this stream of volt per octave data, one going to the bassline voice and one going to the melody, that would repeat. And then using Planar 2, I was controlling grids, mutable grids, and that would control the density and the patterns that grids was playing just by moving one at a time. So I could, like, kind of make these melodies that would kind of be a little sparser, and I could call and response them by controlling, like, the density of the bass line, and it would call, and then the main melody, I would move the joystick over and that would answer, and then maybe they would kind of start to crescendo, and as I wanted more energy in the part, so I could, like, do that all with a single joystick. So that's an example of you know, being pretty fully improvised, kind of on all aspects. And I traded that level of melodic improvisation, like that basically main hand, for percussive improvisation on with the 4-bricks rook on Imaginary Friend.
It's a really lovely way to work. I've had things like the 16N controlling, like macro controlling, as you say, having separate gate and pitch sequencing, the kind of decoupled rhythm idea. I will have decoupled rhythm club t-shirts soon. I've got some new t-shirts coming. I think you may be part of that conversation
nice.
on Discord.
I will get one.
And it was someone said it.
Yeah.
Chip Tunes like decoupled rhythm club, and I was like, "Yep, t-shirt, boom, that's gonna happen."
Yeah.
I'll have those. Yeah.
Ooh, a hat.
Yeah, I
Make
should
a hat,
look
Ben.
at that. Yeah, but yeah, decoupled rhythm club t-shirts soon. But yeah, the 16N having this idea of macro control of so many musical elements that then become improvised. I funnily reposted a post from a couple of years ago at Deershed Festival, where Milo Melodies, last year Look Mum No Computer as well, Milo Melodies and myself go and take systems for 3 days at a festival in a science tent and just let kids, families, anyone that's curious, but it's a really family-friendly festival, just come and play on this stuff. And they're often caked in mud and wellies, and it's an English festival, and it's all that, that kind of vibe. Decoupled rhythm gowns. No, Gerald. Gerald seems to have stuck on the dressing gown point earlier. A decoupled rhythm gown. This completely threw me, that, Gerald. I just keep picturing him in a dressing gown and trying to figure out how decoupled rhythms work into that. Anyway, we'll be at the science tent, and that 16N or joysticks. It's a joy to watch people that maybe don't understand what's going on in a patch or really have never seen a modular system before realize that a fader or a joystick can be a melodic decision. It's not just like a filter cut off, which is that typical cause and effect that people might be used to. That's a lovely one to do with certainly young children, is to just go turn that one, and they do the filter, and they almost do filter mouth without realizing, wow, they're kind of loving what they're doing. It's really clear, but when you put, that's the hi-hat rhythm, that's the rhythm of the bass, and that's the pitches that the melody's playing, or how the sequencing of the melody's being driven, it becomes a really engaging musical experience for anyone. I've found, as I say, young children coming and playing, and they realise that they can interact with this in a very different way that isn't learning an instrument per se. It maybe opens up music to them that they've not experienced before. It's really cool. Couple of other questions as they're building. One off topic, but maybe a quick one. What's the tape deck next to the modular?
The reel to reel. It's a TIAC tape. I don't know how people generally pronounce that, and I know people pronounce it differently. And on your side of the pond, TIAC, it's a vintage one that I grabbed on Craigslist. I had a cassette deck, and it was like, as they tend to do, like had one thing broken with it, and I tried to fix it, and I fixed the broken thing, but broke another thing. And I had just been mindlessly lusting after like a cool reel to reel that there's just, cool. They're very visual, as well as the cool saturation that they'll add to a sound. And so it's serving two purposes there. I like the way they look, and then I like adding that extra analog sauce to tracks when appropriate.
Is there any interaction between the Metropolis and the Symphonian?
Yeah. So for I believe I used it on Imaginary Friends and on Frolic, but in different ways. So Metropolis is going into one of the channels of Symphonian, and then actually it's being used heavily, but just not in a very it's not one of the central melodic elements. So Metropolis is going into Symphonian, and then it's either going into Odessa, was adding in just some kind of more top melody, higher frequency stuff that is a little more ambient, that comes on and off different parts of the song. And then it's either also doing this other thing, which I'll just go ahead and to explain, because either way it's a Symphonian thing. It's either that or the arpeggio function, which is kind of the outlier from the different channels that Symphonian offers for quantization. It also offers one channel that's generating its own arpeggios, which you can clock externally however you want, either with a constant clock or with different rhythms, which is also cool. But the other set of high frequency, just kind of ambient texture stuff was that I was sending either if it was from the metropolis, from the arpeggiator down into a mult, and then into a sample and hold that's down here, and sending different rhythms, I think from grids, to the sample and hold. So grabbing that arpeggio at different times and different rhythms, and then sending that into an Chemies and an Michigan Synthworks SY 0.5, and just for kind of cool, just little like staccato notes that are related harmonically, but just dot around.
Cool. Do your arms get tired from working on the top row?
Totally. Yeah. I generally, like, luckily because of, the other things professionally and then as a parent in my life, I generally can only work like in a session, like max 2 hours.
Okay. It's
generally 30 minutes or an hour. So in that sense, like my arms can handle, being working in the top row for a single session. And then, so I never get I never have to recover, if you will, from working in the top row. But yeah, it definitely, and the other thing I can do, I rarely do it, but this is also a standing desk, which at least Ben in your Discord is like spreading like wildfire. Not saying I was implying I was the origin of it, but I just noticed that's a trend that's catching on with modular, is that it really can kill your back to like hunch over a regular desk. Patching is like terribly, terribly bad for you. So just get a raising desk. Anybody not already on the train in the DivKid Discord, standing desks are the way to go for modular. Whether you have a wall or just a case that you have maybe at an angle, it will change your ability to patch for long periods of time and just your health in general. Get a raising desk and raise it up to wherever you can keep your back straight and patch. Game changer.
Yeah, and thanks for the shout out with the Discord as well. That's exclusive to Patreon for anyone that's curious. Kind of a private community, but completely open and inclusive one. That's also exclusive to my Patreon. So slightly contradicting terms, but it's a way of me managing a community and being part of a community that I can really engage with as activity has grown around the channel. I can't answer every YouTube comment, unfortunately, and every Facebook message. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of, I've got 6 HP, which filter should I buy? And for those that want to go out of their way to support me, it's only right that they then get the attention of my support too. So yeah, you can, Gerald, that's been in the chat, is on the standing desk thing. I'm on the edge of the standing desk thing as the studio's been built. Just trying to figure out how I tier the room. There'll be a lot of custom built furniture in there, but you can say you're responsible for standing desks in modular. Just own it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it was a parallel thing, but I know I've been, Symphonian, the thing that bleeds, and standing desks are like, I shout those from the rooftops at every turn. But Ben, because you were talking about your Discord, I wanted to also as a user and a part of that community, just also plug that as well, because it's a fantastic group of people. It's like it's part of, especially during this lockdown time, when being out and being social physically with people, it's been a great community, both just for like companionship, for those of us who do Eurorack, which is often alone in a basement. That's at least my case. But especially now during COVID, it's been just a great kind of this social thing that I enjoy having. It with helpful people, friendly people, and it's just a very, very active community. Both with Ben, there's always like questions of the day. Ben's always answering people's questions a lot, but also are the different people in the community. And I've come to get to know a lot of people from all over the world through the community who are into modular. So I'm really happy to be a part of it. And I invite anybody who wants to support Ben, but then, in turn also join a really great active community.
Yeah, no, thank you. Appreciate it. But it's totally made by, and it's why I feel confident in saying it with kind of no ego for me involved in any way, that it is the community that makes that really special. It's just where, I center my attention. But yeah, the questions of the day have been great. And them being posed by users as talking points for everyone has been fantastic. It's growing, it's changing. I'll add channels, occasionally kill a channel if it's not that active. Always trying to reorganize it for what's best for everyone. But when we had the Zoom hangout recently, just to look at things around the free module challenge, the breadth and talent and range of people in there was so evident. Stu J, that's been in earlier, we were talking about giveaways and competitions and the legalities of that around the world. And he's like, hey, I'm a lawyer if you want to do a giveaway. And it's like, amazing. Where am I just going to get a lawyer just on hand that's willing to help? The visual work you're doing, everybody's musical backgrounds in a more related musical modular sense, but wider than that as well. There's some useful coffee grinder information for me a while ago in the off topic. Just, hey, I want to grind my own beans. Where do I go? I'm a total coffee noob, and there was some good advice. Back to questions, and I want to talk about where this is going next, and a little bit more about the playing more than one song in a patch at once. But to round out the questions I have, and we'll do a final call for questions, so fire the questions in now if you can. I'll put them in my notes and we'll answer them shortly. But the last one I have noted for now was from Ossie Digi, saying you've got a few passive OR modules, OR logic modules, with the Euclidean circles and grids combination. Are there any other logic modules that you're using to create pattern variations, or is it really coming from the Metron?
Yeah, as I think I touched briefly on earlier, so the OR logic modules that I am using are specifically being used for channels to add variation and spontaneous improvisation between Metron and then the Shackmat 4 bricks Rook. That's how I'm using that, and that's pretty much how I've always ever used OR modules. It was just to like, let me be able to combine a program source and something improvised to get triggers from two different places into one thing, whether that's melodic or percussive. And I don't think I've really ever done anything else with it. Oh, wow. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.
Apologies. I just realised I was muted. Total user error. Thank you for all the piloted screaming at me. I'll ring that back round to the start, and apologies for that. We're looking into moving to round this up, so do ask any questions. They're still coming in because of the stream delay. Error, Ben, you're muted. Apologies. That completely user error. So as you look to play multiple patches at once on this system, I was asking Brett about the drum section and how some people, if you're in a band with an acoustic kit, the set is that drum kit and the set might be an hour long. Other people go out with just a 909 and just play it's techno, and in that environment that's all it needs to be. Of course, if it's DJs playing produced music, the sound of the drums is changing. How are you going to approach that? Will you be looking to change the tone of the drums, add more drum modules in so you can move between different kicks on different songs? Let's start there. How will you manage percussion and drums
Mm-hmm.
moving from its song A to B?
Mm-hmm. My, I don't know what's going to work or what I'm going to be able to achieve, but my goal, I don't really have at this point any room to add additional drum modules so that, like, for example, I could have two different kicks patched up. That seems like a pretty straightforward way to do it. But so my hope is that utilizing things like the Poly preset, and possibly even the catalyst, one of the two catalysts, that I will be able to have distinct sounding drums per different song. Because, as we touched on earlier, like having drums that are a mix of traditional, what you'd expect, and then weird stuff like a 2HB cat, or doing weird stuff with any of the WMD drum modules. That helps. That's part of the wacky sound, wacky, playful sound of Second Breakfast. So I have to have some character in my drums in that regard. So my plan would be, yes, I can utilize presets to have those drum sounds sound different. If not, maybe not all of them, but enough of them that you do get a flavor. I did. I have had a squid solemn pole at one point, and I thought that was going to be like the key element to doing that. And it very well could have been. I ended up parting ways with it because there was an element of it that felt a little too easy for me. I don't have any other like samples in my whole kit. It's all generated in. And so that it was kind of like messing with my ethos of my kit on that level. And then it wasn't as immediately CVable to jump between different banks. I had to either use the banks that have like multiple samples in a single sample and then CV that. And I was too lazy to like make my own of those. So I'll do my best.
And then to extend that out through the parts of your music, what about the bass? Is it a case of, even with if it's a basic mono synth voice in modules or otherwise, you can think about pulse waves, saw waves, more bright basses, more percussive basses, different envelopes. Is that going to be the approach of this? You've got your core, at least for this moment in time, kind of Second Breakfast bass patch, if it was, and it will be a case of manipulating that to be smoother, duller, brighter, harsher? How will you manage kind of bass lines? You see where these questions are going. It's going to be drums, bass, chords, melodies.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How are you going to manage bass between two songs?
Yeah. There will probably be songs that will utilize the same voice, maybe with a little tweaking from a poly and preset kind of change. But more so with my melodic voices, I have more, like there's a lot of voices in this than I would ever need in a single song. So for the melodic voices, I would plan to just utilize completely different modules for a different sound, so that I can have that patch. I can have a couple bass lines per song patched, and that did kind of set me going down this route of getting more modules that are like self-contained. So for example, I do have like the Erica synth bass line. So if I want an acid bass line in a song, like that module's just there, and I can switch to that, and that's going to sound totally different than the like really stacked Birdkids bass line like I was using in Imaginary Friends.
Yeah. Same kind of thing for chords as well. First of all, what are the chords? What is it? Is it the quad oscillator from Dopefer? Is it?
That will be coming into the new case. But up till this point, I have used Chords V2, Cubic Chords V2 in the like free running mode, so that Symphonian can send full per octave to the individual voices rather than letting it use its own quantizer. And so, but my plan will be to have both in, I think. That way I can get a pretty wide variety of chord sounds. I might not, I don't know. Like maybe chords or something that are, I more make that variation about envelopes, short staccato kind of stabby stuff in one song, longer, more patty variation in another. We'll see. I also have the pedal expander for Odessa. So that's another module that I could be using as like a top line ambient melody in one track, and then the chord voice in another.
Yeah. Same thing for melody, but to tie into that as well, let me just catch who asked. User friendly also mentioned, because you're playing the chords and physically interacting, are there any keybed controllers that you're lusting after? And the reason I bring that question in is that's a big physical change potentially in how something sounds. Which bit of it is humanly played? If you move to, say, playing a melody instead of the chords, of course the chords and the approach to how they're played can be changed. But which bit you play, which element is human in a stack of like 4 or 5 layers, I think makes a huge difference. So yeah, how you then approaching the melody, and we'll follow into that. Any particular keyboard type controllers you're curious about?
Yeah. So that my plan for that is, again, it depends on the song. I'll want to be ideally between different songs, moving through the way that I interact with it. So as I mentioned earlier, as an example, like maybe there's one song that has planar 2 ready for me to control to improvise with the bass and the melody with the joystick. I also have a Dopefer ribbon cable, which I thought for sure I was going to use on Imaginary Friends. Imaginary Friends was supposed to have a like screaming guitar solo on it. But just after like other important elements of the song gelled together, I just didn't feel the need for it anymore. But someday, it's like I try to do it on every track. One day it's going to connect. But so like between a ribbon controller, playing by hand on the spot I just have the Arturia key step. And I just use it purely for notes. Like I'm not using any of the clock. It's not even connected. It's just like to send a gate and a note. Using that. I don't know. And then just having some stuff that's pre-programmed in, I feel like that's plenty for now, or that's also all I can fit.
Fiamore asked, favorite sequencer?
I guess I would have to say Hermod, and that's because I found that being with the type of music that I make, or that I like to make, it's very melodic, and I've tried so many sequencers. I've had like all the major big full featured ones, the Vector, the Eloquencer, you name it, you get where I'm going, like the ER 101. And in terms of being able to like try stuff and sketch stuff out, the unquantized recording feature of the Hermod is just unparalleled vast for being like, it's basically like a little mini Ableton. You're just like playing something, oh, that's cool, record, play it in, and then it just captures exactly how you played it, with all the, the humanistic quality of being a little bit off grid. And you're just like, okay, great. I got my melody programmed in now. So I really love that. I am very much looking forward to, if you're looking at the modular grid of the next iteration of my system, you'll notice that Metropolis is out, and I have 2 Ramona melodizers that are going to go in. I have very high hopes for those as being a very hands-on, playable way to sculpt lead melodies or bass line and then evolve them throughout a song. So that's another kind of like approach to sequencing that I haven't really explored, that I have high hopes for.
I love the idea. It's funny how these ideas are worked on in tandem and then end up coming out at the same time, which happened to me with mutes. It was years old of an idea that I couldn't bring to live circuit level to a kind of performance standard that I held mutes to. But then the Muta Jovis from Noise Engineering came out right before it. The 4x mutes from Happy Nerding came out, both of which are great. Some are much cheaper than mutes, and it's kind of just so I experienced firsthand how this happens. But the reason for bringing that up, the melodizers from Vermona are very similar to the stochastic generator from Omsonic and DBS Music, which is a music school in the south of England, where Fen from Omsonic went. Some really good tutors there as well, fully tuned in, performing with Modular regularly, giving talks. Both based on the similar idea of probability weightings to specific notes. And I love that idea. I'm glad you bring them up, so I find it fascinating. The idea of probability and random, but weighted how I want it, because it speaks to how I like to compose through lines in my harmonic choices generally, of if I can move from, I don't know, a C minor to an E flat. So C, E flat, G for C minor, E flat, G, B flat for E flat major. If I make the C minor a 7, it's already got the B flat up top. So, but then this is barely any, the chord's already in there. And depending, I can make that a slash chord where the bass changes, but the chord up top doesn't. And the C starts to feel like a 6 that's added in. And you get this really lovely kind of... well, it rings back to what was commonly called the economy of movement in bebop, where the lines were so fast and complicated that they weren't thinking, oh, I'll play the next chord as a second interval. But it's just a case of if I can just move one finger in a complex line, I can land on these complex chord changes. And I love working that way. If there's one note I can move to do something, like G minor to B flat, and we just literally just got to move a G to an F, and the B flat and the D can stay. I love working that way, and it's glorious on synths. Like big, rich kind of polyambient stuff is lovely. So I like the idea that and I'll pull it back up, the melodizer, I could have, say, a C major, just to keep it simple, C, E, and G, and I can start to pull the C down and add a B in. And it's going to feel like C major 7 for a while, but as the C fully disappears, it's going to feel like it reestablishes as an E minor, E, G, B. And then maybe I pull the E out and I put a D in, and it's going to feel like a G major. And I just love this idea that I can do this, manipulating sliders as it goes. And also that's a very accessible musical way to work even for someone maybe without any theory grounding, that they can find a cluster of notes they like and just go, what happens if I swap the middle one?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a really interesting musical thing. I'm really curious how it fits in with the flow. Are you imagining requantizing bits of this through the Symphonian as well? Is it all still going to run through that hub?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all roads pass through Symphonian in my system. And so with having two Symphonians in the new system, my thought is that, like, you know, one will run to each. You know, and it's an experiment, though. I just I don't even think anybody has them for sale in the States yet. While there are Vermona dealers, but I think, like, it hasn't been a huge release of them yet, and I had to order them from Germany, and I was like, if I love this, I'm going to want another one. So I ordered two, and then my thought is, like, if I don't love it, or, you know, only one sounds good, then I don't think I'll have a problem, you know, finding a buyer here in the States for it anyways. But I have high hopes.
So why a pair of them? Is it because you're thinking in harmony, or how are you wanting things to play off each other musically, where two was the kind of main idea?
I was curious. You know, the very few demo videos that people have put out are always just using one, and it crossed my mind, like, wow, I wonder, like, especially with them being next to each other, and you can use both hands. Like, I just became curious as to if one was a bass line, one was a lead line, or they're like some sort of call and response, what they would be like if you had two interacting in one song. And if that doesn't, you know, really amount to much, then at the very least, I thought, you know, I'll have just one that's queued up and ready for one song, and then for another song, I'll have another one that's there.
I was wondering if it was a bass against lead thing, almost, as opposed to song 1 to 2. I wondered if there's any kind of switching between the two, maybe, of also like preparing a chord or key tone on one and then just physically switching across to something else, almost like the Catalyst, this idea that I'm going to hang in this space for a while, hard switch to something else, I can just re-push up a couple of notes. You could do that with the faders, but kind of pulling multiple faders and pushing it's not the same as a hard switch. So it's interesting. It's interesting to see where that will go.
Yeah.
In this new case, and I've put the link, I'll put it in one more time in the live chat. Anything else to highlight that's different?
You were kind of speaking to it with your idea of switching even just between the two melodizers. There's also a like 16 in, 16 out switch matrix that I'm assuming or hoping is also going to be a key utility for, like, you know, I don't have you know, a sequencer for every song, or like I might want to you know, have the joystick control different things for different songs. And so I'm hoping that I'll have a lot of success in being able to, like, choose what kind of control points I use in different songs. I can kind of have that open to whatever I want by having this matrix mixer and being able to, and this is the key point and the key reason why I got the one I got. I think it's the Elysium. It's the switching between how you have all the routing is CVable. So I can just send, you know, voltage from Volterra to switch for a section of a song. I can have it switch between songs, and it'll automatically, you know, reroute up to 16 different things, automatically pre-programmed with CV, which I think will be powerful. It's gonna be a lot of tedious programming and, like, racking my head around keeping track of it, but the power that's there, I think, could be really important for what I'm trying to do.
Absolutely. MV in the chat just pulled that out. The Elysium matrix, and that's up on screen as well. I'll put the link in to that for anyone curious, and then I will go back.
I'll add one thing too about it as well, is that they have a desktop editor, which I think will save a lot of time. You can label all your channels. I'm not quite sure how you then program the module to utilize what you did on the computer, but just to be able to just use words instead of numbers and just write everything out, program all your different settings, states that you want to have it in, and then send it to the module is going to be huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Double Symphonian, we can see in the case. Is this?
Yep.
I guess switching because different sources are feeding things. It's switching between. Is it an idea of running more melodic voices at once? Why two?
So it's, on the one hand, I could make the argument that I could do it without two. You can have, if I wanted to have a different scale and chords per song, I think it's skipping my mind, but let's just say I could have multiple different scales per song, like enough songs, enough different sequences in Symphonian that song A is in C Mixolydian, song B is in B minor, on and on and on, with a single Symphonian. But the reason why I ended up getting two was I think it will ultimately help out with the amount of routing that I need to ultimately do to use Symphonian on every track. So that's one aspect of it. But the other is, even when I'm experimenting and working on just a single track, I often find that I'll use up all of Symphonian's channels really quick, and then I might be like, oh yeah, but I want to try this voice doing this and that, but I don't want to take down my other voice. I want to be able to A/B them, that kind of a thing. And so just for ease of songwriting, I decided having a second one, I would just be to think about suddenly having 5 more channels of Symphonian open, so that I can just be yeah, well, let's try the Erickson's baseline patched up. Let's have that, yada, yada, yada. And then, and I could just work faster that way. Those were the two things that justified it for me.
So we've answered all the questions in the live chat. If I've missed anyone's questions, let's say last call, fire them away if we've missed anything, but we've gone through everything I've noted. Anything you'd like to know while we're still on about the new setup, the new case? Any other key changes you want to talk about?
Not really. I mean, other than that, unless I'm forgetting something majorly, I'm bringing in some different voices.
Yeah.
Can you still hear me? Okay. I think one of my earphones battery just died. But I'm glad it wasn't both. But anywho, yeah, it's just. Oh.
Yep. I can still hear you.
Okay. Good. Yeah, it's just voices coming in and out that are always changing. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. Cool. I feel like that's something that can always kind of change, and I think it's interesting when someone such as yourself has a setup that is not completely finite, but the roles are clearly defined and how it has to work together is defined.
Mm-hmm.
But to then have these little hot swap areas of maybe it's a changing filter color that just inspires a different change of bass sound, or a particular swap of an oscillator, or like you said, simply the expander for the Odessa and going down this additive route for your chord tones for a while. It's really interesting. Mm-hmm. It feels like we could do another 3-hour stream in a few months just to touch base again. But at this point, not that we're rounding out right this second, but thank you for your time, hours of your time today to do it. For Imaginary Friends and your content, I'm very much interested and very happy to see what you're doing. I may stay up and watch the video you're going to post right as we finish, even though it's getting late, and my little girl will wake me up in a few hours anyway. But yeah, I'm going to start dumping links in for all your stuff for Instagram. I'm going to put these in the live chat for our YouTube. You mentioned Frolic. I did say earlier in the live chat, but just to actually say in the stream as well, that piece and the patch breakdown is on the YouTube link right there as well. This was generally based on this track Imaginary Friends, and then links again as we go. We've been looking at that modular grid link, and this is the next one that I've already been sharing. I will say you can support my work over on Patreon. I can see a few people that are here live have actually just gone and supported, and usernames are correlating, so it's really nice that a handful of people have gone over. Immediately join the Discord. Go create a free Discord account, link your Patreon to it, and anyone that has Discord benefits tied into their Patreon pages, you'll just be pumped straight in to the channel. You'll catch Brett in there as well as myself. Is Not Loves the Melodizer. Also worthwhile and more in depth. I'd love another look at that. Well, I say another, I've only very briefly seen bits about it on the internet. I'd love a deep look at the Melodizer. Couple more links to share. You mentioned Signal's Music Studio earlier for the music theory side. I'll post that again. And Creston HDMI cables was the thing that came up as to making very good quality HDMI when we were talking about eliminating bleed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll give the live chat a minute for any questions, and we'll kind of look to round out. But with you not getting much time, a curious question from me to kind of end my questions. As you move out of this Imaginary Friends patch into this next stage, how long, some of it seems like it would be really quick, but then some of it seems like it's going to take ages. How long will it be before you fall into the follow-up piece that you're working on? Will it musically at the core come together quite quick, and then it's a case of refinement and building out the patch, or will the whole thing take quite a while? Will you labour over certain sections from the start?
I never know, and that's maybe you could get a taste of how it generally goes down for me on the new video that I'm gonna make go live as soon as we're done here. You'll see that I go on a totally different vacation than Imaginary Friends was at first for like half the time. I'm in this like chilled, like this like almost like reggae jungle kind of thing. And then I'm like, this is cool, but I must have got on the wrong plane, and then I'm just like, all right, well, let's try to, get back to something that's more in my head. And that's good and bad. Like I'm kind of joking about it in the video of like, in retrospect, the places that I go when I'm writing a song, are really cool, but there has to be some sort of North Star, in songwriting, or at least it doesn't have to be, but for me there does. And sometimes that can cause you to like not be able to see something else that's really cool because you like, it feels like you're not headed in the direction you set out. So I never know, but I do know, like, what I will say is that, I'm going to continue to, it's still going to be about making single songs for a while, but I will be rearranging my case so that, like, if I get a single song patched, like I'm hoping even the next song, that one I'm hoping to like patch, leave it, and then start another one on top of it. So that's how I'll work into multiple songs. And I'm really excited about the next song, which I got inspired recently to like almost more from the visual side than the music side. I think the music side is cool, but I bought a couple key modules to do this like 8-bit video gamey type vibe, and mostly because of the ideas that I'm having about the visual story that I can tell, making the next video to a song that has this very 8-bit quality to it. So that's my intention, where I'm headed next as soon as this patch goes down.
It's almost sad to think that the Imaginary Friends patch is coming down. It has to happen at some point.
I know. Yeah. it will live. Like, that is the cool part about like Metron and her mod, which have all these save banks. So the core of it will still be here, the bass line, the melody, and the drums. So it could be repatched in the future, maybe in like with a different, polish on it, but it won't be lost to the ether as much as, most songs usually do in Eurorack. So perhaps it'll live again.
I like the idea of self-remixing. That's why, people often almost kind of moan at themselves for having these folders of like dead projects that they now can't load, or like they try and load up an old project that was maybe on an old computer and it's like, I don't have those plugins anymore and I can't do this and that and it's missing audio. I kind of like that. I kind of like, I don't know what the right word is, maybe not gruesome, but it's maybe a bit weird to think of like digging up a skeleton, but I almost like the project being the skeleton rather than the full thing. I like this just, what's this bare bones I was messing with? If I can just get at some MIDI, but I'm quite happy if it's just audio and it's awkward. I'm like, oh man, it doesn't take too long because the amount of time I've been doing transcription, but just that I'm going to have to work these chords out. And some days I may be tired, I just want some little musical fix. I don't want to do it. It's just some audio and I'm like, never mind. And then sometimes it's the other way and it's the MIDI and that's not inspiring because there's nothing sonic to get me audibly interested straight away. Nothing even playing through a track, not even like a basic GM MIDI sound. But I like these skeletons living on. I like it when I've bought modules and people's stuff still saved in there as well. I kind of like, getting back to them like, hey, pattern 4's killer. What's that? And it's like,
totally.
I quite like that. I like the idea of digging these things up. It's funny. Yeah. And it's funny how many synths as well and presets on synths are like that. You will get, I've known people that have bought, keyboards that have gone on tour with Depeche Mode, and then just end up back at some sort of pro audio place. And it's like, I want to buy that one. I want those sounds that they took on tour, and they've got the exact machine. Maybe not from the studio session, but they have that. And all its data is still in there. They don't wipe them, usually. That's kind of cool.
Totally.
Interestingly, Gerald mentions in the chat it's finishing up an album of old sketches and really loving working like this. Yeah, it's a really interesting process. I think, funnily, like going back 15 years or so, I don't mean it in any kind of egotistical or indulgent way, but there was some good music that's just very badly realised, I think, from me. Like, you hear it and you're like, I was onto something. There's something interesting there that's totally different to how I would approach things now. Just completely, vastly different. The end result is maybe very poor, but you just like, what was I onto there? And it's so long past that it feels awkward almost. But I do like that idea of sketches. And it's fun when a project comes about, either self-imposed or a commercial project, for me doing bits of TV music and things, that you can find something like, oh, that would work. And you can just pull. It's like just ripping assets out of your own back catalogue. It's why I like kind of deep sampling a lot of my stuff, that if I'm just going to sit and arrange samples on a timeline, which is quite a nice holiday from Modular occasionally, rarely, but occasionally, I like knowing there's just some satisfaction in knowing that they were mine. Little sounds I've made, little melodies, little riffs. I can go real paint by numbers, but it doesn't feel like paint by numbers because it was all original content at some point. And it's just this big dump of assets in folders. Some of them commercial packs that were released for Loop Masters and things like that, but a lot of it just kind of private reserve, if you like. There's a huge modular sample pack that I just dip into all the time. Speaking back to drums, like you were saying, I love patching drums. I'm not gonna patch every single drum sound when I want to make a track, so I'll resort to modules, or if it's in a computer, I'll just pull samples in. It just works for me. But cool. Absolutely super final last call. 20 seconds or so behind the stream. If there's anything really pressing anyone wants to ask. Thanks, Aznot, for the super chat. Sana that left one earlier as well, if you're still here. And anyone else, that's really cool. MV Dirty says they love that the Sid Guts Deluxe and the Threshold are in your new rack plan. which is the Edge's clone. I'm curious about the chiptune project.
That's right.
Will you go chiptune in the drums? Are you going to like go super limited?
I'm going to play with it. I'm going to really, this has been something that's been great on the Discord channel. Actually, I've been talking with another member of the channel about it, about like, how like there's a purity route that one could take when going chiptune. And I'm gonna explore all aspects of it. How orthodox do I want to be, or not? Or like, I'm inclined to being like, I want to, there's lots of chiptune music out there that people devote themselves wholeheartedly to that genre, and that's awesome. But I think I'm interested in like, what does the second breakfast chiptune song sound like, and what does one like, almost more important than me, what does one look like when like I turn 8-bit in the video and like Space Invaders are like, raining down on me as I'm performing the song, like that's the whole package that's important to me when I think about what that song's going to be.
Let me,
so,
if I can find it, it will be muted. I'm going to zoom in on it. Thinking of what you will look like in chiptune. Check this out. This is in some ways horrific, in some ways maybe quite good. People can decide. A younger and more naive me liked to stop motion in DivKid. We made really crappy videos for any tracks that we were putting out. So there is an arcade machine, and there is let me skip this thing in. There we go, look, there's a little div head, Space Invaders.
Can you Ben, I really want to see this. Can you pipe this through my Skype, because I can't see what your
I apologize.
Or if not, if it's too,
no, I
much,
can.
then I'll just watch the stream.
I can send you a link as well. Can you see that?
Okay.
It's horrific. In some ways, it's horrific.
Oh yeah.
It's very old.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's Pat
totally,
Kid, and I think the best one.
Yeah.
Mario turns into Div Kid. I'm sure he does. There we go. There's the power up. Just that's absolutely amazing. Terrible. But just as soon as you said, what do I look like 8-bit? I was like, I know what Div Kid looks like in a really bad attempt at 8-bit.
That's fantastic, though. I share the enthusiasm and the sentiment behind, wanting to 8-bit yourself.
Yeah. Cool. All right. I think we've got through that. 3 hours, 20 minutes of stream. In some ways it's flown by. It's been great just to chat and to get to know you. I hope everyone else has got something out of it as well. Looking forward to any questions that follow in the comments. As I say, if I can't point you to content or to answer a specific question, I can certainly ask Brett. But do follow the links through to Brett's YouTube, and there'll be the video up going through the patch for Imaginary Friends in much more detail and super high quality that you work at as well, on YouTube and your Instagram as well. And join the Discord. If you're on my Patreon and haven't, there's still a larger amount of people on Patreon than there is on the Discord, which is to be expected. But whether you want to go support there or you're there, do go join the Discord. It's really good. Great. Thank you very much. And yeah.
Thanks, Ben. It's been super fun hanging out and chatting and getting to know you too. And anybody, if you have any other questions like I didn't answer, or you want to get real deep into something, I love to talk about this stuff. As the last 3.5 hours we'll show you. So feel free to hit me up on Instagram or YouTube, or as Ben said, the best way, for really great, meaningful conversations, join his Discord. I'm on there every day. I'm just like, it's just like a chat room or a messages thread with good friends, and all I'll chat your up
Yeah.
all day.
That's my favorite thing.
So,
like when you mention chiptune, and I don't just see you've asked the question, I see a whole thread from so many people. Again, talking about the restrictions of how it was originally made and whether you can entertain that idea or you just take the sonic palette and flesh it out. You find these gems of threads of conversation as opposed to just like one direct bit. Great. Thanks to everyone that's tuned in. Thanks to anyone that supports any more than that. And I'll see you next time, whenever that may be. See ya.